Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Yeah, let's begin. I know it's 9:42. We were scheduled for 9:30, so thank you again for your patience. Some of our colleagues will be appearing as time permits, as their schedules permit as well. I appreciate. I see candidates out there. Really, there's a lot of value in this workshop for you. Because ultimately 5 of you all will be here where we're at, and that's important to me and important to the ones that are here and to council generally. And this is why I think we need to keep going with this. So unless I hear something different from my colleagues here, if you all have any opening statements or whatever, I certainly would allow that too if you wish. Merck?
Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody that showed up here. Really important that we all know the ins and outs of, first of all, of our government, and second of all, our boundaries as employees, our boundaries as council members, our boundaries as a mayor, department heads. It's been a really nice, out of the norm, if you want to say. There's a lot of what went on yesterday that we know about, but tend to forget. So it was refreshing to see some of your presentation. Some of us forget that our places, and it was great to point out, how we should be standing. So I want to thank you for putting this together. Thank Keith for putting it together in such a short notice. And of course, thank our audience for being out there and coming out here and showing the interest that we all have. Mayor?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Are you okay? Right. Yeah, also, too, I think I would like to reemphasize some of the points that we covered yesterday, just briefly. I know we have a checkered history as far as city managers. That's obvious. We've heard some recent comments, and throughout my tenure that the work environment is difficult for some of our employees, and I admit that as well. And I personally feel that it's attributed more so toward, it all starts from the top, as far as I'm concerned. If the top's not corrected or functioning efficiently well, then it flows down. And I think I've seen that. We've tried to correct that over and over again. But now we're at this opportune time where we have 5 people coming in with a new city manager and a team that possibly could dramatically change this from one day to the next if things crystallize and they become united and make things so much better for our community. And despite the turmoil that we've had in the past, again, I do mention, and I attribute this to staff, to the fact that projects get done, completed, new concepts are experimented with and put forward. So the city does function, despite what you hear in the news and what you see sometimes here in council or have seen in the past. And I attribute that to staff. I mean, they're consistent. If it weren't for them and the fact that they're in, day out. If it weren't for them, who knows? And this is why it's so important that the politics should not lead to staff. The politics should stay where it belongs here. The elected officials. And if staff begins to act like an elected official, personally speaking, they don't belong with staff. They belong running for office because we welcome ideas and welcome different approaches to problems that we may have. So again, keeping within our spaces, our channels is, if we get that, and hopefully as candidates, if you can stick to your channels, your spaces, I think the city can improve immensely. In my humble opinion, leave the operational management to the managers and the politics to the politicians, us. So with that in mind, I think we have some, any opening statements, Keith, from your end?
No, Mayor.
Okay, and Rosario, I know you're by tomorrow or the next day you'll be, leading us, so, feel free to speak up or whatever we need to do. And we have every confidence, at least I do publicly, 100% confidence in Rosario to, take us to the next level.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
And of course, Ria as well. Ria's been with us 20-some years, Ria? 26 years, yeah. and despite, again, the turmoil and all the situations, he's been very loyal and employee, and he's been there, and he's got a lot of history and a lot of information and value that he can bring to the city and continues to bring to the city. And of course, Zone, our newcomer here, we made that change, and we expect a lot of good things from you, Zone. And I think you've been in one way or the other, directly or indirectly, involved with city business, and you know how our past has been. So, you can bring, value changes, to the city as well. And of course, the people, the community expect good things, proper things from your department as well. And if I might say too, I think the critical departments that I see, obviously mayor, council, if we have good, decent folks here, looking out strictly for the interest, the common good of the people and not special interest. And that's hard to do because the city is full of special interests, but yet somehow we need to consider that, value that, but yet as an attorney, I see the city as my client, the city as a whole, the greater good, the common good, and sometimes you get lost in the mix there, and as candidates, I just want you to focus on that and take my unsolicited advice. Just be careful with that, because that's the first thing that'll get you in trouble: ethics. And what the other folks will do is try to shame you some way, somehow, whether merited or unmerited, perception or otherwise. That's how it works. And so you need to have a thick skin, be patient, and the truth usually comes out at the end. At least that's my approach. I think that was basically it. We have some people that signed up, and I'm flexible. If throughout the course of the discussion, whatever you have a thought, idea, especially these candidates that are running, feel free to speak up. This way people can start judging you, your viewpoints, and evaluating you as well. So feel free, and we'll allow 3 minutes initially if you're engaged by any of us. Of course, that you're free to continue, but at least you'll have 3 minutes of joining us here in the discussion and engagement. So we have Carol Alexander. Do you want to come up, Ms. Alexander? And then we have Eric Garcia, and then we have Ms. Travish. I know you may want to wait or come up and speak later too. Tomás Izaguirre and Viviana Frank. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning again. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, staff, who I've worked with, not for 26 years, but for, some years. And it seems like there was a virus going around or something, because some of the seats are empty. But thank you for allowing community advocates to be heard in this public setting regarding the future of our city. It's not news that there's been a revolving door in the city manager's office. This instability and chaos does not bode well for both the taxpayer or anyone looking to visit our city for travel or business. The instability at City Hall is a well-known component of our reputation as a city. How attractive is that to any expanding business community? This instability fuels a negative reputation. How competitive are we when marketing ourselves as a destination for travelers or business? An international business owner saw our downtown and commented that a city that doesn't take care of its historic center illustrates that something is wrong. Downtown is the city's living room, so to speak. It belongs to every person who resides in the city. It belongs to every person who resides in each of the 8 city council districts. The streets of Laredo began in what is now identified as District 8, but they belong to every Laredoan. I'm here today to ask you to select a new city manager before November. Another interim administrator only continues the cycle of a city running without permanent leadership. Any long-term objectives and business relationships remain paused while this search for permanency continues. A simple internet search defines the different roles between a hired city manager and an elected city councilor. City manager, a hired employee who is responsible for the planning, directing, managing, and reviewing of activities and operations of the city. The city manager coordinates programs, services, and activities among city departments and outside agencies. The city manager ensures the financial integrity of the city, represents the city's interests. This position requires a person who is capable of being highly responsible, which of course I know is happening here. The city councilor, an elected official who provides for the legislative functions of the city, crafting ordinances and developing policy. City councilors establish the overall direction of a city and provide general direction to the city manager who is actually managing the city. I'm here to ask you to expedite the process to hire a permanent city manager. The process should be the deciding factor, based on the goals of our city that are clearly and simply laid out in the city's comprehensive plan. The plan provides a recipe for where our city is headed and was written based on many professionals and much public input. Score the candidates based on a grid showing their experience with the city's goals that are already laid out and move forward towards stability. Running a city should be about objectives and goals, measuring achievements and need, not about any one individual or district. Thank you all for your service to our city, and I look forward to meeting the new city manager.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander. Erica Garcia? Ms. Garcia? Welcome.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Erica Benavides Garcia. I am a retired educator, and I work downtown in Inao, and I am here really to talk to you about our new city manager, or whoever our new city manager is going to be. I think we need somebody that's going to work with everybody, somebody that makes a policy with everybody in mind, with the directors. Our people know a lot. Our people have been here, like you say, for 16, 20 years. But yet, sometimes I think there's a disconnect. I've been involved in many nonprofit organizations throughout my, I would say, 40 years out of high school. Because, I mean, even then, I've been involved. We need to work on revitalizing our inner cities. I'm from the Heights. I see that. I work downtown. I see that. Sometimes I think that people are working on their own, whereas before I think that the group worked towards a better Laredo. I think we need to find somebody that is willing to make that happen. Be a good leader. Make that happen. Not let everybody be off on their own tangent, like this belongs to this district, this belongs to this district, this belongs to this district. I think we've been seeing a lot of that. And I don't think that's right. I think we need somebody to come in, and we may have somebody. I mean, I don't know. But we need to look at the full picture. Laredo has so much to offer. Like we said, it's sad for somebody to come into Laredo and to see the city look drab and not even fixed. It's like you come in through the bridge. I've been through many bridges. not only in Laredo and all over the country, you know, from state to state or from country to country. And nothing looks like the way Laredo looks when you come in from another country. I think that's something we need to look at. I think we need to also look at plans. I mean, it's hard to work with the city at times when you're taken from one department, this department doesn't handle it, and then this department doesn't handle it, and this department doesn't handle it. You need to have a plan and follow that plan and work towards goals and figure out, did we meet that goal? Did we take care of this? Did we take care of that? Because if we don't do that, then we're going to be all over the place. I don't know if it's because I am an educator and things start from the top, and we have a superintendent and we have a board as well, and every department, you know, has their own thing to do, and everybody's voice, if they've been there for a long time, I mean, they've got the experience. I think we need somebody that's going to be a good change agent, somebody that's going to listen, and somebody that's going to work with everybody. I love Laredo, and I'm happy to be back, you know, after college. But we need to work together. We need to make it a better Laredo.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Vish? Yeah.
Mayor, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for inviting me. I know I got an email from you.
Yes, sir.
I have a few comments to make. The reason we are here today is because, not because Keith Selman is actually leaving, because we had a city manager, Robert Eads. I have to say that, sir, because I have seen 5 city managers in your time and my time in the last 5 years. When Robert Eads was selected, some of us said this was the wrong choice. The reason was there was a national search, there was an international search, then we found the guy sitting right here because so much happened in the people sitting in front of me. I'm not individually saying Ms. Vanessa or Alisa or anybody, but I don't have a faith in the city council sitting in front of me. That's not a reflection on you, sir. I'm talking about the 9 people. Because when Eads was selected, some of us said he's not the right choice because of certain reasons. After a year and a half later, we found out that he was not capable of doing the job and he has to leave for whatever good reasons. When you do a search, we are searching for the right person. If this council is not open for that, it's not going to happen. What we need is a good person, whether he sits here in Laredo or in Timbuktu. We want the right person. That did not happen. Selman and others were not selected by national search. I'm talking about Robert Eads' selection. If this is going to be a charade, there's no point in doing it. That happened during that selection process, okay? Now, because I don't have any faith in the people sitting in front of me, I'm excluding 1 or 2 council members who were not there at that time. I don't want this council to pick the next city manager because I don't have faith in them. In fact, even Mr. Vidal Rodriguez said 2 days ago, we are leaving, let the next council pick their candidate. I agree with you, Mr. Rodriguez. I I thank you for that. I mean, I didn't hear the whole conversation, but I did hear that, so thank you for that. Mr. Selman, you selected a city attorney. I have to say this, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Ben here. We expect a lot from you, sir. We expect you to follow the city charter. I don't expect you to follow the city ethics because it's not there. We need to change the city. The manager has to come in a strong, good candidate, irrespective of where that person is coming from. When Ms. Keith Selman came on board, I told Mr. Selman, you need a good team of good employees at the director level, at the lower level. If that doesn't happen, the culture in the city hall is not going to change, the management is not going to change. Rosario, I have good faith in you. I'm here that you are going to be the temporary interim person. You have been with the city for a very long time. I hope, I am also understanding you are forward for somebody coming in, and you are not going to take up that job. Because of that, main reason, you are knowledgeable and you know what you are doing. I want somebody to come in here tomorrow who is qualified, not rush this process before I leave. I want to give it to my friend, the job. If that's going to be the goal here, you're not accomplishing anything. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. Yesterday, I had an interview. I interviewed an employee for myself. I have been looking for someone, and I didn't find one. I interviewed one yesterday. When I interviewed that person, I thought, oh, this person is awesome. I gave her the job right away. Why I am telling you this? If you are going to start the interviewing process today, and you put an application and somebody applies, you have to hire them, not 3 months later. That's what happened with Robert Yates. There were a lot of candidates. We waited and waited until everybody on the top left. The only man standing was Robert Yates. We don't want to be in this situation. If we find the right candidate today, we have to hire that person today. So if you go on a search today, if you publish in any documentation anywhere, if you get a resume, you better take it and act on it right then and there. That's where my problem comes. You put an advertisement and somebody applies, and before the November election and December elections maybe, if somebody comes in and if you are going to select that person, I don't know whether that may be the right choice. Give us a choice for the people to talk this time around. There's going to be, like you said, Mayor, you said several times, 4 or 5 new mayors are coming in. There are 3 mayoral candidates sitting here, I see. There are a couple of other city council members sitting here, wannabe city council members. We all have, people are going to elect somebody in November and maybe in December. You can start the process, get ready, and then let the new council decide it. Meanwhile, I hope you do a good job, Rosario. I wish you all the best. I hope you as a city attorney follow the charter. We have a charter, even though as much as I don't like some things in the charter, we have a charter that has not been followed in the past. We need to follow that. I'm the first one here standing saying we need to make changes in the charter. That's different. I want to make changes in the city ethics. That's different. But we have not followed that in the past years. Okay? Thank you for your time, Mayor. I know there will be a different opinion as to we want one today versus after the election. Some of us are for waiting to get the right person whenever that person happens. Not once you find the person, hire them right away. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you so much. Tomás Izaguirre, then Viviana Frank, and then we have Dr. Victor Trevino. Hello, Tom.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you for giving us the opportunity to come and talk, give our opinion. About 36 years ago, I decided to move to Laredo and open my business. At the time, I chose downtown. At the time, the economy was vibrant there, and there were 6 other pharmacies, and I was one of them. And now I'm the only one left. But, you know, and there's a lot of reasons for that happening. But the only thing I'd like to say is that, you know, I chose Laredo downtown pharmacy. I chose downtown because it was the heart of the city. And all I can say is that, you know, the heart is sick. We're, if I can use that analogy, we have a sick heart, and we need somebody to come in there and fix it. And we don't need to wait however you want to wait. We need a doctor now, and we need the medicine now to get it back to where it was. And it may not ever get back to where it was, but we can certainly try. And you know, the emergency room doctor is leaving right now. Keith, I don't know where he went, but he's a great guy, and I thought he would be a great thing for Laredo. Unfortunately, he had to leave, or he's leaving. But again, my opinion is that we need to not wait. We need to get somebody now, and hopefully, you know, you guys, you know, would choose somebody that would, you know, lead us back to where we were. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Frank, Viviana Frank. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Viviana Frank for the record. Thank you again for holding these workshops. They're vital for the spirit of the city. I'd like to offer one note, Mayor, on top-down governance. I think that is very true when it comes to implementation, management, and operation. But from strategic planning, from that point of view, and for quality of life in place, it's from the citizens up. There are 11 opportunities and challenges that the new city manager can have. And I use opportunities and challenges because I Googled from your website how you put out the brochures for city managers, and that was one of the titles of what you're looking for in somebody, that somebody who is looking at it the city is telling them, this is your opportunity and your challenge. So, the new city manager it would be great if they had experience in understanding community conditions, the strategies and the goals and the policies that have been laid out in a plan that has come from them. That includes in land use patterns, includes knowledge in how to change land use patterns in a city that has not worked for the city, that is not cost effective to the city. Downtown and inner city revitalization and historic preservation, that they have experience in dealing with this and have experience, real experience in changing the economy of inner cities. In urban design, because quality of place is one of the key factors of cities, whether you're moving here or live here. Alternative forms of mobility, not just the car, walkability, biking, trails, all sorts of alternative forms of mobility. That they have an understanding about housing and what it means to be equitable in the housing market. We have very low numbers of housing that helps that is available for people who are in the lowest income levels of the city. When it comes to health and parks and sustainability, they should have experience in what that means in developing a city and how cities can do that. Cities are the best at doing that. That is what cities, and you can look at all the great cities from small to large that you have been to and say, okay, these people have gotten this. Where parks are part of a conservation plan, not just for recreation, and that they're looked as a conservation instrument. Conservation meaning that you're dealing with the climate challenges of the day. Economic development, of course, is kind of an umbrella over all of this, and they need to have experience in working with they don't have to be economic developers, but they have to know how to work with the economic development groups in the city and have experience and show you and say, look, this is what we did together, collaboratively. Education, arts and culture, quality of life and place, a central point. Actually, the city has gone, in many ways, the city has put in place a lot of great things, but they're just not consumable in any way from a point of view of being presented online or on Open Data Laredo or any of those platforms that we have to show that the city is meeting their goals and policies. Global initiatives. This is a really important part of who we are in Laredo. We are, it's an incredible thing. We're as a typology of a city, we are a city that is incredibly isolated. We're 150 miles from any other city that is of a substantial size. We have small towns, yes, that connect us, but we are not a region. And because we are not a region, or we don't have those connections as a region, and a greater metropolitan area, then we suffer. And so on the flip side of that is that we are a city with a global footprint because of our trade, our main cluster of industry. So these are, while a new city manager may not have experience in quote unquote border crossings and all of that stuff, they do have experience in supply chain management and to understand, and that affects everything. In fact, it affects cities. So, I mean, if they have experience and can show that, then they'll be able to translate it to our are translated into our main industry cluster. And I guess finally, I just would like to say, and it's really important that and this has to do with our culture as a city. We are isolated, and so our culture seems to, have all those problems of having an isolated, being in an isolated place, of, blaming people and the whole chisme thing. And we have a culture of chisme. But when it reaches the heights of in the political rooms of our city, we have to debate strategy and debate solutions and keep it in that realm. And I would ask everybody that's running to, talk about your strategies and your solutions, and not scapegoat and blame people, because we are where we are, and we have to trust a process. The process is built. I mean, we haven't lasted as a country because, we didn't have a great democratic process, and that exists on a city level. And just because, we're nearing November, not to go through a process is hurtful to our democratic process. I mean, we have to trust the systems of government that we have and the process that we have to be able to get the right people in place to do the things that they need to do. Anyways, well, thank you so much for
Thank you very much, Ms. Friday.
letting me speak.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Trevino?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Victor Trevino. For the record, local doctor and candidate for mayor. Some of the things that I see that are important besides what we've been discussing is that we need to follow our charter, which is a document, our founding document, that spells out the principles for the continuity of our government. So we have to look at this document and at its spirit, what it means. And what's written down can be interpreted in several fashions. But one of the things that I do need to say is that we need to focus on the vision. What kind of vision do we have for our city? And what kind of passion we have for our city? And if we're thinking of hiring a manager, we also have to look at these qualities besides his qualifications, which are important. But we need to find out if we can have somebody that could share the passion that we have for the city and the vision. And if we have that, I think we can focus on the problems. We already know what the problems are. Now we need to focus on the solutions. And one of the main problems would be, of course, security, the medical aspect, the underserved, and the water problems. Security is also very important. So all these issues are important, and I think we need to do this by informing the public, being transparent, and this way we can provide leadership. So those are my comments, but I think the most important thing, or one of the most important things, is that we find somebody that has the vision and the passion to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Trevino. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am, Ms. Bettis. And throughout the course of the discussion too here, raise your hand and we'll call upon you too. No, that's fine, yeah. Just try to limit your comments to about 3 minutes. Yes, thank you.
Good morning, everyone, council members and audience here. I'm Cynthia Mares. I'm here as a private citizen, but also as a candidate, political candidate for mayoral race, and also as a LC trustee, my experience as an LC trustee. I've sat here yesterday and I watched, the process from the consultants, and it's nothing new to me because having served, or serving as a trustee at the LC board, we have gone through that process many a time in selecting a president. And basically that's what you're doing here. You're selecting a president or the CEO for this city. So I know that a lot of comments have already been made in terms of the qualifications of this individual, which I totally underscore and agree with. It has to be someone that not only is going to fill the shoes of that Mr. Salzman is leaving behind, but as well as having a passion for the job that they're going to undertake. Because we all know, and it's been over-discussed, and for the sake of not sounding redundant here, that CEO is the one that's going to be carrying out the policies and, policies and programs that are set forth by this council. And so it is the job of that chief executive officer to know how to bridge that gap between the politics and the administration. So obviously the individual has got to be well-versed in that arena, have that experience. But because beyond that, I think we want that individual to also bring ideas. They will be carrying out the policies and regulations and programs of this council, but they need to also contribute to new ideas as this great city changes and evolves, because it is evolving every day. We have a very vibrant city, and I think at the core of that vibrancy, the impetus there is our human resource, and that we cannot overlook. And so that new CEO has to know how to communicate, how to listen, and how to manage and work with all these employees who have been here at the core of the city for many, many years and have a lot of expertise. We cannot overlook that. We must take care of that human resource. Myself, having been a human resource director for over 18 years, I know what it takes, to be able to, as you deal with your employees, as they bring forth their complaints and their concerns, which we already know about. But coming back to what the CEO is supposed to be doing, I look forward to having that process started and moving forward. And if you find that individual before November, I say, let's hire that individual, he or she, because this city needs right now the continuity, that is going to be left behind. Well, I have no doubt, Ms. Cabello is an excellent and an expert in her field, but nonetheless, you need somebody that's going to be stable. This city is very vibrant, but we also have a lot of challenges at every corner of the city, north, south, east, and west. And all of you as council people representing that know those challenges and are working hard to make improvements into bettering the quality of life. But I think as a council, there's even bigger, projects and a larger vision, was presented by our consultant, that has to be looked at and considered. This process is long. To seek a CEO or to look for someone to do a search, it's an arduous process. But I commend you for doing it and also for opening it up to the community. We just hired a new president and we went through this process. And sometimes you feel, oh my God, is this process ever going to end? When are we going to get to the finality of it? And more so when you have to do an inner look at yourselves. And some of the comments that were brought up by the consultant, were very enlightening, that you all open up about how you feel of what's going on right now in the council. I think the perception out there, with the attitude that we have, is that you all are disconnected. So how is that going to come together then? How are we going to bring that? And hopefully a city manager can bring all that, unity by offering, like I said, the recommendations and suggestions into programs, and that we all work with that individual to ensure that the quality of life in this community gets better. It can only get better. As it says, we cannot become what we need. I was pointed out yesterday. We cannot become what we need if we remain what we are. So change is inevitable, even though some of us do not like change, but it's inevitable. Why? Because we want the city to prosper and to thrive, which I think it can, then we must make sure that that city manager, that we work with them, we communicate, and that we listen to the concerns of the people. So thank you again for putting this process forward, for the transparency of it all by involving the community, and I hope that we have some positive results very soon and you will make the best choice in our next CEO, our next city manager. And thank you, Mr. Salzman, for everything you've done, and thank you, Ms. Cabello. Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Mares. Anyone else before we continue with the program here? No? Okay. Mr. Shellman, any of the council members that weren't here that would like to make an opening statement, feel free at this point? No? Okay. Yeah? Okay. Okay, and Mr. Shellman, any other points before we pass it on to Doug Thomas? Yes, Mr. Thomas, again, welcome, good morning. You've heard some of our comments, and I know that you all kind of fit in the scheme of what we have this morning.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, welcome back. It's always, as I say, as a consultant, whenever you do a 2-day presentation, you come back the next day, you hope there's an audience there. So appreciate the attendance of your population, as well as you as elected officials and staff as well. So I know we're scheduled for about a 4-hour session today. For a couple of the council members, or the benefit of the doubt, we didn't get a chance, there was a desire because we lost some elected officials to deal with a couple exercises we had planned to do yesterday. I'm prepared to do that now, but I also know in talking with you, Mayor, there was a discussion about, because you've got a number of folks that are running for office and they probably want to get to the meat of the matter, but I also, so I'll defer to you. If you want to do that at the beginning, you maybe want to hold that off till later, because I know most of what we're going to talk about today is about the search process and about the options and the issues, and I've got some recommendations that I think you might want to be considering, and I don't know what everybody's schedule is, so I'm going to open that up to you if you want me to dive into the other parts first.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the search process, that's where the value is, I think.
Okay.
And then if there's time.
There's time we can come back and wrap up the governance piece?
Personal reflections or whatever, yeah.
Certainly understandable. As I said, I'm working on your behalf, so I want to make sure I get the delivery there in the process. So what we're going to do then, I'll really going to start off talking about point number 2, the city manager search process overview, so that you can understand what, obviously we are one firm. We think, obviously I'm biased, I think we're the best firm out there in the country in terms of what we do, and we'll talk about that. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we typically do a search process. And then I'm going to walk through a little bit about feedback that I had received from you as elected officials through the advance interviews about the things that you thought were important in terms of attributes, skills, backgrounds, traits, things of that nature, as well as some of the issues that you're likely to be facing with. And then talk a little bit about from the you and others have all talked about the experience of this individual, about what our International City-County Management Association feels are the traits that a successful manager needs to be effective in their responsibilities. And then I'm going to give you a sense just from things from doing city management searches all over the country, and large and small and everything in between, just some other thoughts for consideration that you might want to take into account that maybe had not come forward in the process, and recognizing I did not get a chance to talk to all of your staff and all of you as elected officials. And then I'm going to give you some thoughts and recommendations about how to deal with some of the things that you've said and some of the things your community has said about how you might want to structure a search process. And then at that point, really kick it back to you to say, now we're into policy calls and directions of how you want to proceed. But we can certainly give you the insights of what's worked and what hasn't worked in other communities. So that's kind of the way we'll go forward. So I'm going to go through this process now. We're just going to get to, I'm sorry, to go back here. So typically when we're asked to come in to do an effort, sometimes we're shortlisted and we meet with a board and we do kind of a presentation about what we do as a search firm. Other firms may do things similarly. They may have some other twist along the line, so obviously the bias is going to be coming our experience about what we end up doing as well. So the first thing that any successful search process should involve is understanding you as an organization, understanding as elected officials, the composition is the hiring authority, as this is an appointment responsibility of the mayor and the council. The second piece of that is understanding the municipal organization. Every organization has its own DNA, it has its own culture, and what works and doesn't work, and the dynamics, and where are the leadership in those positions, where are the vacancies, what are the challenges and issues that they may be facing that quite frankly may not be on your doorstep as elected officials, because they're dealing with the day-to-day, and they may or may not have risen to your level of concern yet. And then the third element is what you heard here as well, is your community. And so the nature of this position is such that it's a public position, and they've got to kind of feel comfortable in those three categories. Elected body, you've got to fit and have that connection, organizational fit, and community fit. And I refer to that as kind of like a three-legged stool. And if you don't really take into account all of those things, you always have kind of a wobbly stool between the two legs of the third leg in the process. So our approach when we come in as a search or recruitment firm, the first thing we do is start in a similar process to what we did with you. We want to meet with all the elected officials. We typically do that individually, talk to you about your background, interests, desires, things of that nature. Talk to all of the direct reports. I only had a chance to talk to a few of your direct reports as part of this effort because of the timetable. But you've got, Keith, remind me, 20, how many department heads? 27, something like that? 27, 29 somewhere? And a number of vacancies, a number of interims, things like that. We want to find out what's happening there. And then in the third element, we typically we ask you, who in the community is important as stakeholders we meet with. They may be major employers, they may be the university, they may be the chamber, whatever that looks like. And in many cases, we also do community forums and focus group type sessions where we have sessions like this, and we'll say, here's what the process looks like, talk to us about a variety of things, and we facilitate that to get as much feedback as we can about what's going on in the community. That's so critical because if we don't understand what you, your organization, your community are looking for, we're your boots on the ground to help you find that right person. So it really takes a lot of legwork at the front end of this process because our candidates are going to rely upon the information we provide to them, and they're also going to talk to us about, what isn't in the brochure, or what's behind the scenes in that effort. So it starts there, because if you blow that, you're not going to find the right person. So that's our process. We spend a lot of time at the front end of that effort, and we can tailor that and be expansive if necessary. Sometimes there's community surveys involved, things of that nature as well. From that point, then, once we develop a marketing piece, the position profile brochure is what's called, you'll see that, you'll have some ownership on that, and I'll show you an example of what that looks like. How we market that position is equally important, and I'm going to talk about those candidates that are in the position and looking for the next job, and then most importantly, those what we call passive candidates, candidates that may not be really in the marketplace and aren't looking for the next opportunity, and how do you reach those folks? So we'll talk a little bit about how we do that process as well. And then the nature of this process will also go through a triage as we go out and market the position, get candidates into the pool. We typically would meeting with the elected body to go through a triage process to say, these are folks we think meet or exceed everything you've told us you're looking for in terms of education, background, experience, or just, they're fit for what you're identifying. Like any position, you're going to have some that check a lot of those boxes, some that don't check them all, but they're very well strong candidates. We just don't know enough about them yet because they haven't told us that, or they may very well be your final candidate, but at this point we don't know yet, so they're kind of in a second tier. Anybody that does HR, I will tell you, you will get applications from folks that have no business applying for that. They don't have the background, they don't have the skills, they don't have experience, and they've got so much baggage in their history and ethics or otherwise that they may be a factor. And so, we'll present those, but we don't normally spend a whole lot of time on those candidates because that's what you're hiring us to do to help you screen through. And then you may or may not have internal candidates. And quite frankly, at the front end of a search, you're probably going to know internal candidates better than we would as your search consultant because you're working with these folks on a day-to-day basis. We'll give you insights about how we think they compare relative to the other candidates that are in the pool as well. And so typically, the process would involve you going through and selecting semifinalists. And then we asked, and I'll explain what that looks like in terms of what those individuals do, and they're providing additional material, they're doing some video interviews, we're starting some background material review on them. And then we would then work with the hiring authority after all that work's been completed by the candidates to have a chance to review that information. And I always joke, it's kind of like for those fans of quote-unquote reality TV, The Island or Survivor or whatever. Typically, you're going to find a bunch of folks that you like, a bunch of folks you don't like, and we spend a whole lot of time talking about the folks kind of in the middle. Do we include them as a finalist or not in the process? And so whether you're on the island or off the island, so to speak. And then once you get to those finalist levels, then we're involved in helping you prepare for interview processes, helping the candidates. Maybe they may have some additional exercises, presentation materials to prepare. We do criminal history, credit, reference checks, all that sort of work together as well. We facilitate the different moving parts of the interview. You as elected officials certainly would be involved in the interview. Your senior staff's typically involved in a chance for them to meet because your candidate's going to meet the senior staff as much as they're going to want to meet the candidates. We typically involve a process of at least at a minimum, a meet and greet where the community is invited when we provide candidates bios information. That's all part of a press release in advance, and we have that opportunity for your community to come and mingle and meet with the candidates and provide feedback and insights to you as a hiring authority. Sometimes we have citizen panels where they're also involved, or other different staff panels. We kind of work that process around, and we'll talk about that, those options and issues as you go forward. And then at the end of the day, how that position is marketed, and then how we get to that point, we would then work with you to negotiate with your city attorney the final terms of agreement and the package to be able to get that process forward and hand that over to you as well. So to give you a sense of where that starts, and we've started a little bit of that with you in terms of the background, but we will use a piece called a position profile brochure that we will market the opportunity in. And so typically for a position like this, and I would assume you'd want a national type search, we're going to talk first and foremost about the community. What's the lifestyle? What's Laredo all about? What are the things you're most proud about? The festivals, the events? Because in many cases, some of your candidates have never been here. And in fact, I'll say most of your candidates probably have not been to Laredo unless they've traveled here for other reasons, but they're not necessarily from here unless they're from, an internal candidate, so to speak, or someone from the community. But the vast majority of folks are going to be probably coming from somewhere else. So we want to market your community first and foremost, because that's the first kind of catch. Am I interested in this geographic location and what's life and what the lifestyle and the quality of life's about? So we'll use material from you, pictures, graphics, text, your history, things of that nature to market the community as a whole. We're going to talk about the governance structure in that effort, because any council, any city manager is going to want to know how are you structured, when are elections, what's the composition of the council, what are the responsibilities, the size of the budget, the tax rates, all that. So we'll talk about governance and organization as a whole. How many employees, are you unionized, things of that nature as a whole, so that they understand the scope and the breadth of the responsibilities of the organization in totality. Then we'll start delving into about the position. And at that point, we'll talk about the responsibilities, the oversight, the roles, the things specifically, typically you'd find in a job description that would say this is what the city manager does, and this is the authority of the city manager as well, so they can get that handle. The next element that we then talk about is what has described, one of your speakers this morning spoke of. We referred to them as challenges and opportunities. And we'll typically identify 3 or 5 or so major challenges and opportunities based upon the feedback we've gotten from interviews with council, interviews with staff, feedback, and community focus groups, whatever the surveys, whatever is ultimately used in your process from your community. And we'll say these are the ones that we think are your top issues that whoever comes forward is going to have to face. And then after that, we'll also, from these various same sessions, we'll put together a section called Ideal Attributes. This is your ideal candidate attributes and background, skills, sets, things like that you're trying to get. And then after that, we'll talk about how to apply and what the benefits and the compensation, a bunch of other material, links and material from city's website, budget, land development plan, things of that nature, whatever ultimately we feel would be helpful to market the position. That is so critical because that is the lens that candidates are going to say, is this the right opportunity for me at this juncture in my career? And so we've got to get that right first, and that's got to be something that there's got to be agreement and buy-in. It's also critical for us to get that right because that's the lens that as your recruiter, we're going to be evaluating all your candidates. How do they fit in? What's their education? What's their background? What's their experience? Do they have relevant experience in the issues that are critical to you at this juncture of your community? And then how do they also deal with the challenges and the dynamics that we've learned from as well? So it's not only a lens for the candidate, it's a lens for us in working with you as your consultant to go forward. So that front-end process can involve an extensive period of time depending on how elaborate. For an example, we've done some searches in Oregon for a police chief for a university community, and we probably did 30 public sessions, including meeting with the homeless, because the impact of the police department was involved. So, I mean, it all depends on how you want to tailor that and the extensive nature of that. Some can do it pretty quickly. More larger, more complex organizations often have more sessions built in at the front end of that process as well. So that part is really critical, and it underscores, you've obviously had a number of your folks here today and at your meeting yesterday that are interested in this process, not only as candidates, but otherwise, and they have a stake. They're resident, they have a stake in this process. They're concerned about the long-term direction of the community, and so it's an important element to capture them. And your candidates are going to want to know that it's been an important, comprehensive understanding of what's going on and feedback in the community as well. So as you go through that, if we were to be marketing that position, after you've approved the position profile brochure, we would go out, and typically our process is about a 90-day process from the time you say go to the time your final candidates that are selected are in town doing interview processes. Give or take weeks, months, whatever, scheduling, vacations, all that sort of stuff. But a normal, full-blown search runs about a 90-day window from the time you authorize us to go. That doesn't take into account if you have an elaborate upfront process with citizen input and stakeholder meetings and surveys and all that. That can take, depending on how you structure that and how complex that may be, that's before. But once you say go, about 90 days is what it takes to run a search. You had a couple of your speakers today. You can't make this a 6 or 9 month search from the time you start to the time you make a decision, because you're going to lose kid candidates to other searches. They're just going to they're going to be accepted. It's a competitive marketplace, but that 90-day window seems to be a good fit where people were engaged as they go deeper into the search and become more invested in it. So I want to highlight the fact, because many folks, when we do the triage process, they say, well, you know, we don't know a lot about these folks, and that's by design. You don't want to spend all your money at the front end doing everything about every candidate. You're simply like, there's several references of emergency room today, you're triaging candidates. So at the front end of that process, you're going to know a little about a lot of people. They're basically what they've told us in terms of their cover letter, their background. We may know them personally, or we may know them from another search. That's additional insights we've got. Obviously, we've got people in searches all over the country, both current and previous. But at the front end, you're not going to know everything. And that may seem a little uncomfortable, but that's okay. That's the nature of the game. You're simply trying to get yourself winnowed down, and you want to invest more resources and time in those candidates that are deeper into the process. So as you move into the semifinalist level, in our case, what we end up doing is, okay, you've selected typically 10 to 12, 15, wherever the natural break is of whatever the hiring authority will be, that say, we want to learn more about them. We're not sure they're the one, but there's enough there, we want to know more about them. In our case, what we end up doing with those candidates is we will ask them to respond to a fairly detailed questionnaire. It's somewhere around 20 to 25 questions. And it's going to be everything from their background, the size of the budgets, the size of the organizations, why they left their previous positions, and then we will identify things like their management style and the matters that we think we just want to learn more about them. And sprinkled in that questionnaire will be a series of questions that will be directly related to the challenges and opportunities that have been identified in the brochure. So if that's growth management, if that's community strategic visioning, whatever that is, that will be, and we're going to ask them to kind of talk about their background relative to those issues, so we can start to understand kind of how they get their arms around that and what relevant experience they've got that would be directly applicable and how they would approach those issues. You're going to learn a lot more about them as well in that regard. We always ask them about anything in their background that might be of concern to a future employer. We ask them about generally what they're looking for in compensation and benefits. We don't normally advertise our salary ranges. We talk in general terms about a competitive salary, because we feel that if you put a number in place, I will certainly get a handle of what your desired salary expectations would be realistically, so I'll have some idea of the range. But if you put that there and you get somebody that's very close to the top of that range, that may be an outstanding candidate. He or she may be the candidate you need, and you say, here's the top that we're willing to pay on day one, you're not going to see that candidate because it may be too close to their current salary. So we always encourage folks to say, it'll be a competitive salary, here's the range, but if you're in that ballpark and you really like this community, we encourage you to apply. And we're going to ask them generally about, without negotiation at that stage, you know, what would it take for you to probably be in the ballpark to be here? That way, whoever's in the hiring authority has the ability to say, listen, you know, I know we're trying to get these candidates in this area. Based on this pool, there's 2 or 3 candidates that are outstanding candidates, but we're going to have to flex what we thought we wanted to pay, but we think they're worth at least bringing into the process, and if we ultimately say they're the one, you're prepared to at least go forward. So that's the way we structure it. So you see some candidates that you might not otherwise see if you don't include this, if you say here's the range and that's as far as you're going to go. So those semifinalists will go through that. We also, in our process, we ask them to respond typically to about 4 pre-recorded interview questions. These are more generic in nature. What is it about this position that interests you personally, professionally? You know, what isn't in your resume you think might be important for us to know about? More generic, so that you get a chance to see how they communicate, how they present information. Those are timed. They're about 3 to 4 minutes, no more than 4 minutes in length. It just gives you another touch point in the process. Although, as a recruiter, as we're evaluating at the triage process, we're doing some basic Googling and looking at background if there's been short-term issues and things of that nature. We're talking to some of those candidates. We're certainly getting a feel for what's there, but we typically do what's called a stage 1 media search. Mayor, you use LexisNexis, no doubt, for your legal research. We use LexisNexis in that fashion for, you know, high-level overviews. And then we would turn all that material over to the hiring authority to be involved to review that material, and then we'd be back working with you to select those 8 to 12 folks that go forward. So once again, triage high level, first at the application, you know a little about a lot of people. Semifinalists, you're starting to get a little bit more knowledge and insights and perspective about that. And then typically your finalist level is normally about 3 to 5 folks that you're interested in bringing on board for interview processes. And at that point, we would work with you to develop a process that would involve, there may be PowerPoint presentations, there may be candidate exercises, we'll work on criminal history, credit background checks, and then our efforts is a very extensive kind of 360 review of reference checks in terms of supervisors, subordinates, overseers, colleagues, professional references from the communities they worked in, things like that. So that by the time you're there, ultimately, if you've made a decision, whoever the hiring authority is making a decision to hire, all that homework's been done. Now it's just a matter of negotiating the package, and we would work with you through that process as well. So that's kind of the overview of what you're going to see. What I'm going to tell you is we're in a unique marketplace, and I have some time later today to address this. It's a pretty competitive marketplace out there. You've all heard about the Great Resignation, the Great Reset in the process. And especially for challenging positions, and I will say that again, this will be a challenging recruitment for reasons that we've been talking about in the past couple of days, but we'll certainly get into it in greater detail today. You're going to want to have a firm that can actually do a lot of outreach for passive candidates and the importance of social media to do that. So in our case, we actually have someone that's a social media expert. They determine when. Typically, based on research, passive candidates are more likely to see information on Twitter or on LinkedIn or on Facebook and things of that nature. And so our process involves marketing this position extensively to folks that might not be looking at the job ads, so to speak, ICMA, your TML, and things of that nature. So our process all looks differently based upon what's going on. And what you'll see from these areas, most of those passive candidates, they're not going to know about the position unless you do something different. They're not looking at those job descriptions. The reason I raised that, this is an example of our search process. We find that although we're going to recommend that you advertise in the state and the national trades for the obvious reasons, because some folks are going to be plugged into those in the area, we find that about two-thirds of our candidates that are selected by our clients as semifinalists have heard about a position through something SGR has done specifically to market the position. So those are those kind of passive candidates. So regardless if we're hired or someone else is, that's a question I would encourage you to explore in terms of the process and how you do it. This is the process I just mentioned to you in detail. I know it may be hard to see those pieces from the very start, from the interviews all the way to the interviews with you and your staff and your community, all the way to the interview, the on-site interview. And as I said, typically it's about a 3-month process from the time you say go. It's about a 4-month process if you take into account however elaborate of the front end of that would be in terms of interviews and efforts and activities. So even if you were to say start today, you're probably not advertising for at least a month at that stage, because if you're based on what I suspect will be your desire for extensive background. That can be accelerated, obviously, but my sense would be you're going to people are wondering what's going on there.
Yeah, of course. If you can hold the thought, yes, Mr. Bish, something brief?
Okay. Typically, and you have to work around holidays, you got to work those, yeah, but typically, yes. That's to the point of hiring someone, making agreement. From the time you started advertising, the time a candidate has now been selected. Now, when they start may be different, yeah. Yes. That could work if you started in October. If you started that advertising in October, that's correct. That's correct. Yeah, and typically, as I said, that will take 3 to 4 weeks, depending on how fast and schedules and the number of people. You've got a lot of staff to interview. I want to talk a little bit later about how we work with communities that have elections and how does this happen. So bear with me about some thoughts about how we've tried to navigate that for the right reasons, because I'll tell you that'll be a challenge for your candidates as well. So. This is just a chart. What I'll tell you is that's some of the searches that we've done in other parts of the country. Pretty extensive background there. I will tell you that generally speaking, with the exception of about 2 searches I've done, your host state will generate most of your candidates, but not always. There's been a couple times where people from outside have led that process. So the elements that is to kind of reemphasize what I spoke of earlier is understanding what you're looking for. If you don't get that right, everything else is going to be a problem for you. So that clear expectations, the understanding, the involvement of your community, your staff, you as elected officials, and whoever else may be involved in providing that input, identifying those those things that are most pressing in your mind as far as issues and challenges that the next manager will face. Certainly identifying their qualifications, their education, their experience, their background. Identifying the way in which you're going to reach passive candidates, which is very, very critical in today's marketplace as well. Your process should also involve, once you get into, especially as they're into the candidate pool and the outreach has been completed, how you keep in touch with those candidates. Because if they're in one search and they're qualified, they may be in 2 or 3 other searches if they're in the marketplace. If they're a passive candidate, they're probably just looking at this opportunity uniquely. But a number of the other candidates are going to be involved in other searches. And so how your search firm keeps in touch with those folks and keeps them engaged and gets them involved is very critical, because it's just a very, very competitive marketplace as we go forward as well. Our process is trying to get a kind of a 360 review by the candidate videos, the questionnaire, detailed questionnaires. By the time you get to the finalist level, we always have a process we call our first-year game plan, which is how the candidate, if they're appointed, your finalist, if they're appointed, how they would approach the job in their first 30, 60, 90, 180 days in the balance of their first year. And you might think that's a routine exercise. I see thousands of these. They all do it a little bit differently. It gives you normative insights about how a candidate really thinks and approaches issues, and the kind of the ebb and flow that they will go through. We typically work with you to develop other on-site exercises as part of the process, so that it may be about a PowerPoint presentation about their perception of challenges and opportunities in the position. It may be an economic development presentation. It may be something else. We don't know what that looks like, but presentations and public speaking are normally a pretty important skill set in managers, so we try to build an exercise that's involved with them. On the 2 aspects, most of our candidates will tell you they never go through as much work as they do through an SGR search, but they also tell you at the end, by the time I was hired, I was prepared for the job. I had done my homework. It forced me to really do my homework to go forward, but it also allowed you to get a perspective, the hiring authority and the community involved, to get a true perspective of the quality and the background of the candidates. And then, obviously, at the very end, you've got to offer a competitive compensation and benefit package that goes forward in order to be a successful search. So let me talk a little bit about what that search market looks like as well. So I mentioned earlier that SGR is involved in a variety of different programs, and one of the programs we have is our Strategic Foresight, which is our Futurist program. And what that meant was, we started this work, we actually got forward, as you'll see. It's basically looking down the road to get a sense and a focused perspective of what the landscape looks like in a variety of arenas that local governments navigate. And then from there, to understand and communicate to members of the Strategic Foresight program what those options look like, and how do you best position your organization to go forward. So these are leading edge cities that are kind of always looking down the road, not just right in front of them, but 5 years, 10 years down the road, about what's going to hit us in our face, and are we going to be prepared for that as well. So when we started this program last year, it started with 80 local governments from 19 states, from very small communities of about 4,500 to over 1 million in population, so pretty diverse area. At that point, we've now actually joined, ICMA had a program called the Alliance for Innovation, or AFI, and they've now asked us to take that program over, because we're the only consulting firm that has this kind of strategic, futuristic foresight program put into effect. So we actually have our conference in Austin, the first Alliance for Innovation conference in several years. It'll be in Austin in 2 weeks. So if you haven't thought about that, that's a great opportunity to learn a bit more. So when we started this program, the first thing we did is survey those 80 local governments and say, what's going on out there? We want to hear from you what the biggest challenges you see taking place in local government at this point. And not surprisingly, because we're coming through the world of the pandemic and the impact, as you'll see from that area, workforce, recruiting, administration, hiring, remote work, all that was the single largest pain point, if you will, with regards to local government operations. I said yesterday, you've got close to 3,000 employees touching your citizens in any number of ways on a day-to-day basis in the services they provide. If you don't retain, attract, and be able to recruit people for those positions, that's a problem for you. And so at the end, that's a big issue, because if you look at your budget, generally speaking, when you take your capital out of the area, I'm sure Rosario can tell you, the single largest component is personnel cost. I don't know, what's your personnel budget here? Rough numbers. Yeah. So 70% of an $800 million budget, somewhere in that, a big, it's a big number, a lot of impact. So let me, as we go through this, and I know this is harder for me to read, I'm going to step back a little bit out of your camera light there, but you see, but the areas that you see that are highlighted really in red, those are more pain points, and moving down to the blue are positive. Not surprisingly, most of those areas are in red. And I want to focus on this concept of the ones I've highlighted, doing more with less, stretch thins, making trade-offs, workforce problems, experiencing talent and shortage, burnout, understaffed, under-resourced, no bandwidth. Those are pretty significant issues. I would suspect that you're facing here as well. I suspect you're not going to be an aberration. These are some direct quotes coming from local government leaders across the country. I would advise people to join local government. Perception is public employees are overpaid, don't work. Everyone's political, coming in with their own agendas. Good people are burned out and disgusted. Whole groups are ready to quit. That's in a very tight labor market, and local government is in the midst of all that. And this is what we're hearing from our colleagues across the country. When you look at all the future operational issues that are facing local government, the biggest item, 21%, came back on workforce challenges. This is the market you're facing right now in terms of trying to attract talent and elements in. So this was supposed to have an audio to it. I'm not going to sing this. The first time I did this, it came down. Oh, there we go. As I said, you don't want me singing. I have a son that's a musical artist, but I'm not of that category. So I just want to unpack a little bit about what's happening, because everybody's got their kind of thoughts and theories on this, but this is what you're going to be looking at as you're trying to attract someone in local government. So this goes back. These are going to be a little bit dated. They were towards the end of the calendar year, but basically why people left. And I want to highlight that a lot of people left because they had COVID or they had child care issues during the pandemic. But the biggest one I want you to look at that top area. This most significant impact of why people were leaving the workforce is they were retired. And so you got to start to unpack that a little bit more and say, well, if you follow that straight line projection of traditional employment retirements as we become older as a society, what you see is a big jump. There are more millions of people retiring and continue to do that today than in the past. And so that's a factor in terms of how do you attract these folks coming forward. And when you start to break this down into demographics, obviously baby boomers and others are the point hitting retirement age are a bigger segment. But at the end of the day, even as you go deeper into your organization, you can see there were close to 6 million fewer workforces wanting to work from ages 25 to 64. So your pool of candidates is getting smaller. Sorry.
So question, because we don't know better, right? What is the average life of a city manager in a normal city?
So I'll answer that, yeah. So typically, it's 5 to 7 years is the average tenure. And I say that with a tongue planted in the cheek that it's like dog years. Every 1 year in local government is like 7 years in terms of the nature. So you age a lot during that 5 to 7 year period. But 5 to 7 years is what we would normally see as a typical tenure in the process. So the point I'm leading to here is that there's fewer people out there, and especially at the higher level skill set, those folks are starting to retire, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about why the next group coming forward is. So this is a startling information. This is just to give you a sense of raw numbers. You can see, obviously, I don't think this says, does it have a pointer? Yeah, it does. Well, it doesn't work with a screen. You can see that major dip as you get towards the right of the screen.
Before you continue, a little clarification. 70% of $200 million goes out to employees.
Not of the 8, that's right, because 800 would include all your capital budgets.
Exactly.
Fair statement, Ruben, absolutely. Still, it's a big number. Yeah, it's still a very big number. So as you'll see after the pandemic, when the pandemic first started, you'll see the dip and it's gone up, but it's nowhere close to what you've had in terms of people looking in the workforce of what is traditionally done. These are just raw demographic data points. So when you start to look at what's happening in the local government arena, you start looking at what has been referred to as the silver tsunami. And so these slides, I'm just going to go through this area, but the third bullet I want you to get a sense of is that this isn't going to go away as the pandemic hopefully gets resolved. That third bullet is going to be with you till 2030. Every single day, there are 10,000 baby boomers that hit retirement age. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to retire, but that means they're eligible to retire, and you're seeing in the previous number, more of them are accepting that position. They've gone through the Great Recession, they've recovered and gotten back into their retirement programs. They kind of got their communities through COVID. Now they're saying, I'm done. I really mean it. I'm done this time in the process. And so the challenge you've got is the next two generations down below them, the Generation X and the millennials and all that. I'll show you a slide later. There's just not enough of them to fill all the slots that are in place. Now, this is workforce as a whole, not just city management, but it's indicative of the challenge you're going to face, though. And so basically what you've got, as Department of Labor was talking before, it had 2.3 million fewer people than it did before the pandemic. There was close to 8 million by April of 2020. I said yesterday, the last BLM statistics, there are 2 jobs for every 1 job seeker in the marketplace right now. Obviously, we got a problem. Yes, Ria.
This is amazing because we didn't create 5 million jobs in the last 2 years. So how is the difference? We lost only 1 million people in pandemic. Where did all these people go?
They just have checked out to a large extent. Not all of them. They just, well, I mean, I'm not going to get into the political stimulus checks and everything else. There's a lot of people not working, and they've made a decision not to work. I will also tell you that, as you'll see later in this presentation, COVID had a change. It's affected the psyche of our country, and it certainly affected the psyche of our workforce.
Or they're self-employed.
Yeah, exactly. So what's happened is they have, as a result of not working, they have done some self-reflection. Do I want to still work in what I did, or do I want to do something different? Some have gone back to school, some are doing things, some have become entrepreneurs, some are doing side gigs and multiple side gigs. They've decided whatever they did in the past, they don't want to do together, so they're not back into the marketplace. So that's a piece of it. Yes?
You say hit retirement age, what retirement age are you talking?
It's generally in that 60 to 70-year-old window. It's just the demographic window, because it depends. Social Security changes, you know, like I think I'm not till my generation's not till like 67 3/4, something like that.
Some people retire at 55.
Exactly. These are BLM numbers, so they're going to be coming from traditional Social Security retirement age. So it's going to vary depending upon what group you're in and when your full retirement age hits. Yes.
I just want to point out to everyone what Doug's talking about here. These are the challenges that this organization is going to face over the next decade, and or maybe indefinitely. But if it's the challenges that the organization is going to face, it's the challenges that your city manager is going to face.
That's the reason I'm raising it.
That's why we're going through this.
Yep.
Okay, there's someone else, I think, that had a question. Yeah. Ms. Frank.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so in essence, through the comprehensive plan, you know, we have to look at the comprehensive plan again and incorporate some of those potential amendments, yeah. No, but to be highlighted more. Thank you. Great.
So let me just give you some other quotes from some other places that looking at local governments, as you can see here from Route 50, it's a free newsletter. If you don't get it, it's certainly encouraging as elected officials to consider signing up for that. They're facing staffing shortages, the burnouts and the impacts that I just described in our own strategic foresight involved, this whole gray tsunami of retirements taking place that's affecting it. It really started about a decade ago. I've been in this business for 35 years before working with SGR now for the past 7, and we've been talking about this stuff for a while. And I will tell you that very few organizations do a good job of addressing it. A lot of folks talk about succession planning, talent development. I'm over the country. I can tell you, I can count on one hand the cities and counties that I've worked with that I think are doing it well and helping that pipeline development. But what's happening is this change is not going away along the line. That 52% of public sector workers say they're considering leaving their jobs, with 33% saying that working through the COVID crisis has led them to consider retirement. You've seen that in the raw numbers as well. And then basically at the end of the day, because of a lot of local governments have traditionally had very stable workforce and they've got their own retirement programs, they're now saying we're done. And you're now facing the local government specter is really, really challenging. I will tell you as a recruiter, as it pains me as a recruiter, we have blown up since COVID has gone away. We've more than almost tripled the number of recruitments we're working on now than we did pre-COVID. And those are just the highest levels of the organization. You can imagine what's happening all the way down through the lowest levels as well. So bottom line going place here, this is I'm sorry, let me go back to this slide. This is the point I was trying to say. This is the raw demographics. Everybody wants to talk about efficiency. Everybody wants to talk about more with less in the process. The bottom line is that baby boomer generation, as they move through the retirement through this next decade, you can see the workforce demographics are increasingly smaller going forward. So you're fighting against a very competitive marketplace, and there's just raw numbers. You just don't have as many people out there. Now, as it relates to the city manager role, what happened is that during the Great Recession, a lot of assistant managers, deputy manager, those positions that oversaw multiple departments or had more than just a departmental focus went away. The job didn't go away. They got divvied up to a bunch of other people. And so now what you have is that next generation coming forward, which normally had a pipeline of assistants and deputy managers, that pool has gotten smaller. And so now what you're seeing is candidates that are coming more from departmental focuses up. So they've got a little bit more of a learning curve because they've traditionally come from one department as opposed to overseeing multiple departments, which is the nature of the city management role as well. So those are just kind of raw numbers going forward. So this is this point going forward, and this is something that we've talked about. A number of you, as well as your staff, have spoken about how do we do pipeline development? How do we get talent development? I'm just telling you, it's an area that most city manager candidates now are going to be expected to help you develop. And you're going to have to invest in your personnel like you've never done in the past, because those organizations that do that are likely to attract and keep their people. Those that don't are going to lose them to those organizations that will. So I say that jobs and benefits and compensation are certainly an equation. That's always a challenge as well. But it's more than that now. And I will tell you, as demographically speaking, as you move into the millennials and the Gen X's and the Gen Ys, just as your one resident spoke earlier, in a demographic standpoint, they want to be paid fairly and equitably, but most of the time they want to be part of something bigger than just the job. And that's where local governments can trump the private sector generally if they have mission, vision, values. How do they touch the lives of people? It's a different focus, and that's why we spent yesterday talking the importance of that. This is where the rubber meets the road. Building that culture not only will keep your good people here, but will help you attract it. And if you don't, there are other cities all over the country that are doing it, and they're going to be the ones attracting those folks from all the way to the top to the bottom level of your employee classification processes. So just recognize, this is not going to go away just after the pandemic happens and we finally hopefully get resolved. You're going to be in this mode for several years, the better part of a decade. So some other comments here, about companies that leverage age diversity of their workforce. How do you keep those people that may be thinking about retirement, but also an understanding of as the employment sector as a whole is getting the communities that we serve as we get older as a community, having those older retirements, keeping them here in some way, shape, or form will help you kind of stem the tide going forward there. Some other elements, if you're not thinking about listening to processes, procedures, work from home, hybrid strategies, this is a whole new world. I guarantee most cities never thought about a work from home policy before COVID hit. I'm now finding that some areas where they're forcing their employees to come back, they're losing employees. They're saying, I'm done. I've demonstrated for the last 2 years I can do my job remotely. Now you want me to come back just because you want me to come back. And they're finding communities and organizations. So this is freaking out the HR folks because it's changing the whole dynamics. I'm also working with organizations that are saying, that's the organization we want to come. We want at least have a hybrid system or the option to allow them, and that's how they're retaining and attracting new talent going forward as well. So big shift from the Great Resignation to Great Retention, same sort of concept there. You really need to be focusing on how you're going to retain your top talent going into the effort. So these are issues that as Keith said, are going to be basically affecting you and affecting your manager. A couple other slides just to give you a sense. This is called from the National Employee Survey, or NES. Polco does this every year. This gives you some benchmarks of how people feel about their jobs. So as you can see, there's a lower percentage of those that feel they're fairly compensated for performance. A little higher in staff morale, but as it relates to organizational, shows appreciation for the work they do just a little over 50%. Not really strong markets there. So if you're thinking about going out the door, you know, this is how you treat your employees as an important element. The element that I think you want to take away from that is that, you know, half of the employees job hunted in 2021, 41% they were definitely job hunt in 2022, 25% they're undecided, and if you do the math, that means 2/3 of your employees are probably 1 foot thinking about going out the door. So wherever you're facing now, I don't know, in talking with Keith and Rosario, I think you're 30% vacancy rate, somewhere in that ballpark now, even higher? Even higher than that? Just think if you took 1/3 of that on top of it again in the marketplace I had. So this is important stuff to just address as we go forward. Talk about engagement and that. I want to get to the point of some other elements. You really have to focus on your employee development, certainly focusing on your recruitment activities, and that's going to lead to some real challenges that whoever's in that seat, staffing and retention, is going to be one of your top challenges. Whether you've identified it or not, I'm just telling you that's going to be a factor, and those organizations that build it. Yes? Never say never.
Well said. Yes, Ms. Ramos? Sure.
Mhm.
And so then the rest of the individuals that are working, how do you explain to the taxpayer that you're more than welcome to stay at home because this position that we have, we're gonna let you stay at home. And then you have all the other employees coming to work, so, I mean, I'm.
Yeah, so what I'll tell you, and we work with a lot of communities about trying to become, and what Karen just mentioned and what you've just raised as well, is how do you become an employer of choice? Because that's where you want to be. You want to be able to track that. I have a whole different workshop on that. That involves looking at your job description, sometimes looking at your educational requirements. Do you still need college degrees? Can you do certificates, things like that? But as I said, I want to go back to this concept of the COVID has changed the culture and psyche of society. The concept, I don't recall, I went through these pretty quickly. There was one speaker that said, the impact of working from home is the most significant change in our American workforce since World War II, when the Rosie the Riveters and the woman entered the workforce and the labor effort in a most significant way. And you're not going to be able to put that back together again because people have proven it's worked. Now, in local government, not all jobs can do that. If I'm working and repairing a water line, I can't do that remotely, but there are a variety of jobs that can. And what we're saying in working with a variety of cities is it's not a one-size-fits-all. You have to figure out hybrid systems. There's still some benefit of collaboration. You still have to cover office hours. So collectively, we do job sharing. What used to be one full-time position, maybe it's two part-time. And one person doesn't, not all people want to work from home. They've got kids and all that. They don't want that. So you have to find the mix. And so there's not a simple silver bullet. You have to just be flexible and to encourage that and make the best decisions you can in order to still provide the service you got. So don't assume everything can be done remotely. That's certainly not the case. Yeah, yeah.
So I think the city manager should, in fact, be able to work not only with the employees and the council, but also with the stakeholders.
Sure.
Which you mentioned in the first slide.
Mm-hmm.
Which is the school districts,
Yep.
the colleges and the universities, and because they're gonna be able to get everybody going and putting everybody in.
Fully understood. Yep, yep, I get it. The reason I went through that, as I say, it's a bigger indication than just the city manager marketplace, but that's the marketplace you're in, and I will tell you it's an overarching issue. When our strategic foresight members are saying this is the biggest issue you've got, I don't care whatever else you're looking for in a skill set, having a manager that can address that and help drive a culture and look at the flexibility is something I just wanted to make sure as you're considering this very important hire decision. Yes.
Mr. Trevino, do you have a comment or question?
I guess one of the comments, I hear a lot of the comments, and I think one of the biggest issues is public trust. It's great that your city manager is going to meet all these qualifications, and you guys might like him, but does he have the public trust? Because ultimately, he answers also to the public, because he has to understand that even though, parts of Laredo are doing very well, there's parts of Laredo that are not doing very well. We know for a fact, because there's surveys out there that show 29 out of the 60 neighborhoods live in extreme poverty. What that means is that 4 out of 10 residents live below the poverty line. Most of those in South Laredo. So we need to talk about equity. And the city manager needs to understand that. In the past, you used to say, hey, look, you know what, I'm thinking of moving to Laredo. I'm like, well, have you been to Glass Kitchen? No, well, I think you should go first to check it out. People have to be connected to the community. And I think that's important because you may hire a great city manager that maybe Oracle or somebody else might hire, but he'll do terribly here because he won't be able to acclimate. And that's a really important part of the job. Someone has to be able to acclimate to those type of things.
Very true. Thank you.
I think we're probably fixing to go through that. Yeah, the attributes that are being looked for, it's something that I refer to as the 4 fits. You've just hit on a couple of them. Your city manager needs to be a fit for your organization, needs to be a fit for the council collectively, needs to be a fit for the council individually as well, and then needs to be a fit for the community. And you've hit on those.
Before we go any further, for the candidates up there too, we've been having a lingering issue in council, and I think our council members will agree to this too. It's this disparity in salaries. You know, we've been trying to fix that for the last year and a half or so. We haven't done so. And simply, I think, because it's gonna cost us millions of dollars, and I want you to be aware of that. Because, and it's primarily making sure that internally our employees feel, you know, equitably considered, paid, benefits as well. And then we don't necessarily have a plan of succession for our department heads. You know, we're lacking that, you know, seriously. So be aware of that too. So the next city manager needs to truly focus, in my opinion, on, you know, internally first, we can get our people to be able to service the community and not have this low morale and dysfunction as far as, you know, salaries, and they feel that maybe someone that has less responsibility is getting more money and vice versa. Yeah, someone else, I think, in the back.
Doug, I just want to give you a number. From March of 2020 to now, we have 260 city employee retired. That's pretty much 10%.
Okay.
From March 2020.
Just doing 1 month. Yeah.
We've had 10% of our employees,
260 employee retired.
260 retired, yeah. So that's, it just shows you, you know, how important that's gonna be for the next city manager and the next council. Yes, sir. Yeah, your name, please, for that. Okay. That's a question.
If you hold on that thought, because I'm going to give you some thoughts about suggestions and issues of how to deal with that issue, I promise I will be able to address it. You just kind of hang on to that for as we go forward, if that's
go
okay.
ahead.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
All right. So let's forge forward. Let's talk a little bit. I wanted to give you some insights of what I heard from the conversations that I had, because I think that will provide some insights. Hopefully, there'll be some comments that will be consistent in your community. So I started off saying, you know, in a perfect world, what would be the full range of qualifications and abilities of your preferred candidates for the position? So I started with the charter, because in your charter, not all charters, you got to start there, not all charters outline specifics, but in your charter it does. So it says the city manager shall be appointed, they shall have a master's degree and no less than 8 years experience in government, economic development or other government-related field, 5 of which must be in a supervisory or managerial experience, and a master's degree in public administration is preferred. So your charter is obviously got that. You may want some other things above and beyond that, which is certainly taken into account. So things that I'd ask all of you, and the feedback of the ones that were able to speak with me on it, experience in city management. It shouldn't be the first post. This is a pretty complex position. We'll talk a little bit about non-traditional candidates a little bit later. But there is some desire and looking at that, and as I say, about are there folks, we've got to figure out whether that fits into your charter language or not. Other skills that you're looking for: an outstanding communicator, both oral, written, and presentation skills. Demonstrated leadership in running a large and complex organization. We talked about that yesterday. You think about the diversity of services that you run, that's a pretty complex place to do, and all the moving parts and keeping the wheels moving forward. Strong understanding of municipal budgeting and finance and utility operations and rate structures. You know, obviously, utilities are a big business for local governments. They're enterprise operations. I know you're facing some rate issues. You're facing a number of challenges in that function. And I will tell you, across the board, any strong city manager candidate, large or small, they always got to know where the fund. You got to pay for things. You got to understand what that looks and feels like and how that all comes together. Some other things that came forward: you've got a lot of capital projects underway, capital project management and grant management, with the federal dollars and the infrastructure dollars that are coming forward. Even though the manager is not going to be the one out in the field running this stuff, there's a lot of parts of that. It's like a symphony, and making sure that things are getting done in appropriate times and the processes are in place to make that work forward. So that's a skill set that was desired. You just mentioned economic development, redevelopment, and transportation, logistics. If I'm doing an economic development search, I do a lot of those searches depending upon the nature. Some are advanced manufacturing, some are biomedical, it all depends. In this case, you've got obviously transportation, logistics, And so someone that is not necessarily your economic developer, but understands that marketplace, because each one of those sectors have different ebbs and flows, and understanding how it comes together. Some comments that came, the vision for the organization, the vision for the community, and how those all mesh and make, good music for you, and put another way. And certainly your land use and master planning experience. You're going through some tremendous growth impacts everywhere. When your Convention and Visitors Bureau director took me around, she kept saying, this has only been here a couple years. This has only been here a couple years. You're just seeing the massive growth. And then the last piece that came up as well is International City County-CM. That is ICMA Credentialed Manager. This is a process where individuals do a 360 analysis of their skill sets. They identify the areas where they can enhance their skills, and then they commit, after they go through an application and a review process, ultimately come into being a credentialed manager candidate. Then they have to commit to at least 40 hours of continuing education and addressing and filing reports demonstrating that they're expanding their professional development going forward. And once you're in, you're not in. You've got to continue that process going forward. So that's another classification we see. Yes?
I have a question. The ACMA-CM certification, do you have to have experience or have served as a city manager to get that? Or can you get that without having any city manager experience?
No, you have to have some background. You have to be in so many years of experience. It doesn't have to be as a CM. It can be as a department head. It can be as a deputy or a deputy or an assistant city manager. But you can apply and work towards it, but there is a combination of years of experience coupled with that ongoing, being entered into the program, and an ongoing 40-hour plus commitment to professional development.
So there are city managers coming out with that certification that have never served as a city manager before?
No. To be an ICMA CM, you're going to have some years in the business, absolutely.
No, but I mean, like, as a city manager, you're saying that they could have deputy or they could have assistant, like.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, yes. They have had some public sector leadership responsibilities to be, yeah.
But there are people coming out with that certification that have never actually been the city manager of a city.
That's correct.
Okay, and so one of the criteria that we were looking at is that this should not be their first post in local government, but I think that Laredo, we need somebody who's looking for a challenge, and I think that we're looking for somebody who maybe wants an opportunity to, grow with the city, grow with us, kind of thing. So I'm not opposed to hiring somebody who's certified, who has never actually been the city manager, but they have that certification, because this would give them an opportunity to grow, whereas other cities that are maybe a little bit better positioned for competitiveness are going to want the ones that have the experience already as a city manager. So, in other words, like, I don't think we should be that picky, because, they're going to come and they're new, but at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't handle the work.
Right. So,
We have a range.
Let me give you an example. I just recently did a search in a community in Florida, about 90,000 in population. And what I often will see is, rarely do I see ICMA CM required. What I normally see is ICMA-CM desired. In the case that I just mentioned, the Florida community I mentioned to, that individual was a deputy county manager, was enrolling in the ICMA CM program. He interviewed, was accepted into that program, and is now an ICMA CM, and he's the first-time city manager in this particular. This is his first city manager role as a city manager, but he had that professional development background and was able to grow, like what you said, into the position. So yes, that takes place. I don't think I've ever done a search where ICMA CM is an absolute requirement, but it is a desired, because what it is, it's demonstrating that the individual you're hiring, or the individual you're seeking to hire, is committed to their own professional development.
Well, because we could hire a city manager that has been a city manager, but is not necessarily
A CM,
ICMA CM certified.
That's correct, absolutely.
City manager, versus we could hire somebody who is ICMA CM certified, but
Still
has
working
never
their way
been
up.
a city manager
That is
before.
correct as well, absolutely, yep.
So I think that's.
It could go both ways, yep.
Yeah.
Yep, understood. So moving forward, the other issues I wanted to get a challenge from your talking to all of you and your staff about, when I talked about challenges and opportunities, it's like a word cloud. The more often I hear the same sorts of things, the more likely they're major issues for you as an organization and community. So these were some of the things that came forward. These aren't prioritized. They're just basically coming at, paraphrasing of what I heard. Water and wastewater infrastructure challenges, pipes, pressure, reliability concerns. I think everyone has spoken about that. I know your community has spoken about that as well. There's a desire to look at secondary potable water supply source, bridge rehabilitation expansion, including the new 405 bridge that you're discussing and how that all comes together and some resolution there. Some concerns about transportation networks, specifically Mines Road, but you also spoke about the inner and the outer loop. Some of those are under your control. Some of those are under TxDOT efforts and a combination thereof. A lot of comments about development and financing of a formal street maintenance program. You're doing some work, but it's not comprehensive. There's concerns about, what does that look like going forward? Heard a lot of discussions about the inner city development and redevelopment. You had some comments this morning about your downtown. I find this almost going across the country, affordable housing and homelessness. I don't know what affordable housing looks like, but most communities are struggling at that right now, and I think you had a speaker this morning talking about that as well. The element of building and developing your municipal organizational capacity, the stuff we just got done talking about, recruitment, retention, succession planning, things like that. This goal of solidifying your vision of what you want to be as a community and your strategic planning, and then also how do you leverage and expand upon your unique position as the largest land port and the international trade that you've got. In other words, that's going to happen, but is there a way to get that accelerated to improve wealth and build community wealth and job and employment opportunities, things like that.
Or keep that standing.
And obviously to retain it, exactly. So, but the sense of that's, you got a great foundation, how do you leverage that? Some other issues and challenges, helping you as a governing body find consensus and see that big picture, getting back to your vision of your organization, maintaining your financial position, and that's going to be a unique challenge, not just here, but for all Texas communities because of the state-mandated revenue caps. And every community has to deal with that a little bit differently, but it's going to affect everybody going forward. We mentioned about growth management. You've been blowing up in your growths and just all the impacts that comes with schools, and not that you're running schools, but it comes to schools and traffic and infrastructure and utilities and building the organizational capacity to address all those new needs and all those service demands that will take place. A couple specific projects. You got the Binational River Park that's been discussed. You got the new sports complex that we talked a little bit about yesterday as well. A number of you spoke about the need to update and reinvest in your information technology systems. That some of your systems are getting pretty dated or outdated. They just need to be upgraded, and those are significant investments as well. There was a desire also that how the organization could benefit from consistent citywide messaging. You've got probably individual departments doing individual things, but there's no umbrella that kind of brings it all together. And so I don't know what that looks like, but that was raised.
And a question about that, like when a potential city manager is looking into the city and they start looking at our different media channels and our different communication, I mean, is that something that they look at, like the consistency of messaging, or is that gonna, because I think that's an issue that we have, is just that we're not consistent with our messaging, and I've been saying it for a while, but I just don't know how, if a potential city manager would see that and say, I can help with that, or they'd look at it and say, oh, that seems like they're pretty disconnected, or just.
Yeah, to your point, yes. Given, I'm going to say the age of the internet, we've been around for a long time now in the process, but the bottom line is, many times we'll find when we do those exercises for on-site interviews, and we'll say, all right, we want you to do a short, high-level PowerPoint of what you see are the challenges and opportunities from your perspective to the community. They'll have done their homework on you when I see those exercises come forward and say, here's some areas that I think that maybe you haven't talked about, but I'm just looking as a candidate that I think we can help you address. And some of those will be your website design, your communication, how you handle your HR, all those things will come forward. So that's that, how do we learn and get more information from candidates? They will absolutely do that homework. And given the opportunity during the interview process or during a formal presentation, you'll get some of those insights.
I think all these are great. I think the biggest challenge we have sustainable workforce. We don't have workforce.
No, yeah, agreed. And that we talked about, yeah, absolutely. That's why I want to make sure that you had that as a background as well. And then there's some also discussions about community health care and children's hospitals and the needs as you go forward. You know, that's a component certainly in the wellness and the quality of life that goes forward there. So those were just some of there may be certainly others. Some of those things that I've heard in the presentations or the comments from the public yesterday and some today, I think resonate with some things there, so that's good. For the most part, that's what we try to do at the front end, is get as much of that together, and then we'd identify them in some comprehensive fashion and saying these are the ones that we think are most critical for the next manager to be facing as part of the marketing of the position. The next piece that I ask each of you to come back to us about, you know, I gave you all, I think the example I said, I'm going to give you the magic wand, you get to wave it, what's the perfect city manager look like to you? And so, you know, their background, their skills, their traits, their attributes, things like that. So these are just paraphrasing what I heard back from you in those conversations: ability to develop respectful and professional relationships with the city council, and, you know, understanding the roles and responsibilities we spoke yesterday. That you would benefit from a non-local candidate that could provide a fresh and external perspective on operations. Familiar experience in border issues. Obviously, you are where you are, and that's a factor. You know, that's not going to change going forward. Strong ethic commitment. Be willing to say no and push back if needed, if they're being pushed in areas that didn't seem to be appropriate relative to the charter responsibilities of management and micromanaging of the manager's office and the administration. Given your, obviously, proximity to Mexico and bilingual skills would be desired. Many of you said that would be great, but not required, but certainly would be desired. A commitment to transparency. You know, does the candidate come from organizations that pushes information out, engages the community, talks about what's happening? A number of you all spoke about that, and I think I've heard some of your residents say that as well. The ability to understand international trade, logistics, and transportation systems. That's a pretty defined area in economic development, but understanding that component. This one goes, Keith and I would both say, if you're not thick-skinned, you know, you're probably not in the business, because no matter what you say, you're going to have people coming at you in different elements. You got to be able to roll with that and go forward. And an excellent communicator with clear messaging. You know, this person is going to be the face of your administration. They've got to be able to convey that information appropriately. Other ideal attributes: worldly, understand how other successful communities operate. If there was a theme that I heard coming out of my conversations, and just my own perception, is that there's a sense that be it by design or by history or culture, you've been kind of isolated. And I think part of that's probably geography. It's been pointed out, you don't have a lot of other cities around you, and you're kind of 150 miles or beyond to some of your other major metropolitan areas. But the sense is, there's a sense that this is just the way we've done it. And there are other cities, there are other counties, there are other successful organizations, and having somebody that has seen that would be beneficial to you. And these are things I heard from you, so I'm not trying to impose that on you, but I thought that was an interesting perception there as well. A desire to look at process improvements, importance of operational metrics. You know, you have plans and efforts, but a lot of you spoke about how do we really track if we're being the most efficient and effective we can be right now. Understanding the border and the unique culture that you have here in Laredo. Being comfortable in making bold decisions. And this may go back to the point of kind of the sword of Damocles over managers of, you know, if you don't do this, you're going to be fired. You're going to have to make decisions, and that's part built into the DNA of management. You've got to be willing to be bold and innovative. Don't be willy-nilly throwing ideas out there. Do your homework, hear the reasons and rationale, but willing to make those tough recommendations and issues that take place. Someone certainly has to be politically savvy. It doesn't mean they're political, but they have to understand the politics and the world in which they navigate. It's the nature of local government. Be decisive, definitive, not being afraid to make those bold decisions as well. An element that although the manager, your charter has some unique provisions that we talked about yesterday, where you've got council involvement in hiring or firing and requiring votes to do certain things. But for the most part, your manager is that unique employee that plays and helps you in policy, but also serves as a buffer to your administration. Your department heads didn't sign up to be under the firing spot every day. They're not generally in the position of being fired if one council member or they decide you just want to make a change in the city manager. And so the manager has to be able to play that buffer to say, you know, that's my area, I'll deal with that issue. That's not the commission's area, the council areas, but that really represent that and be able to provide that buffer experience given the unique nature of the role of the responsibility. We talked about, as we just spent today, recruiting, retaining, encouraging professional development, a very strong skill set. A number of you said that as well. experience in collective bargaining, you've got some of that. We don't see a lot of that in Texas, but apparently there's some of that. Plus, you also have a civil service system here. Not all places have civil service. So understanding how you have to navigate those rules and responsibilities is something that would be important in your next manager. And then, you know, clearly strong financial background, understanding budgeting and things.
Yeah, I've got a comment, if I may, on being bold and making decisions and being able to say no. That's important, but I think the city manager needs to feel protected. There's a security space there through legal means, like indemnification.
Oh, sure, yeah.
You know, where, yeah, I'll make this decision, but he's no dummy. I mean, he's gonna say, if I'm making the decision of being threatened and there's a probability of a lawsuit that it's gonna involve me, and then I'm gonna have to be paying for attorney's fees and that sort of thing. So, you know, to be able to, you know, to make those bold decisions, he needs to feel that there's legally that he's protected some way.
Absolutely. I will tell you that would traditionally fall under when you do the employment agreement with your manager. There's always a section that talks about that the city is going to provide indemnification, insurance, and programs, so the decisions, to the extent they're operating within the parameters of their authority, they have protection in that regard. Now, if they're doing something totally illegal or outside of that boundaries, they're on their own, but that would normally be a part of your employment agreement, absolutely.
Like a
Yeah.
D&O insurance type thing?
Yes, yeah. I will tell you, as a city manager, they're named, it's like police chiefs and city managers. They're named in almost anything the city does. Somebody, you know, they're suing all the council members, they're suing the mayor. It's just the nature of the position, so that would be an acceptable coverage, that is not on their nickel. That's traditionally covered by the city.
Yeah, empowers these folks to make those bold
Absolutely.
decisions and correct decisions.
To the extent they're operating within the powers and responsibilities,
scope
if they're
of their
stepping
duties,
outside,
yeah.
they're on their own jurisdiction.
Absolutely,
But
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Yep,
Okay.
yep, definitely. Some other issues that came forward, attributes, experience in helping and setting, achieving community's vision, comfort with the public nature of the position and being engaged in the community. This is the part where I mentioned earlier. This is a public position. They will be engaging most of you recognize that people are gonna know who the manager is, and they've got to feel comfortable in their skin in that environment as well. We talk about worldly understanding other communities, transformative, visionary, help build the organizational culture, proactive versus reactive. Sometimes you feel like you're always kind of putting out a fire. How do you get ahead of that so you're being aggressive and trying to head things off down the road that's likely coming at you? A focus on customer service mindset and this process improvement, and Six Sigma is a way you can get different belts and different levels of effort there. Whether they've got that or whether they've worked in organizations that have encouraged that. So I don't say at the end of the day, you're probably going to look for all these types of skills, plus have a cape that has a big S in the back of your manager. It's the nature of the job. But they don't have to be experts in all these areas, but what you're looking for is somebody that has seen it, worked it, experienced it in some fashion is what I've got. Now, obviously, that's kind of everything I've been hearing from you. We would crystallize those, but I just want to give you a sense of what you've heard, and I think hopefully your community would have some comfort in some of the things that you feel would be in that waving of the magic wand, the ideal attributes of your manager. The other piece, before we get into kind of process here, I want to just identify, I said, listen, at the end, help me, we joke about, there's a great quote in George Orwell's book called Animal Farm, and it says, all animals are equal, it's just some are more equal than others. So in the midst of all this stuff that you've got going, I said, all right, if the first 1 to 3 years, what do you really think has to happen here? Just to get a snapshot. And we'll help articulate that if we're selected to do this search to help you grade her. And these, once again, are not in any particular order. They're just coming to me as they came through the discussions. Stabilizing the municipal organization, dealing with recruitment, retention, employee development, things like that. Getting rid of organizational silos and helping to build a healthy workplace culture and value systems. The upgrading of the IT systems. Some resolution of the 405 International Bridge project. At least some plan for the Mines Road transportation challenges you're facing. The development of a street maintenance and financing program, long-term repair maintenance program, underground utilities. I know you just approved some bonding authority for that, but that's a big project, and it's not going to go away overnight. It didn't happen overnight. It's not going to go away overnight. You're going to have to really focus on that, and how do you do that, and do that in a sustainable fashion. Looking at rate analysis studies and recommended rate structures. That's probably going to go back to your utility operations. Those go hand in hand. Those are all revenue driven. Looking at your financial stability and exploration of alternative revenue sources, especially in light of the state mandated revenue cap. Having a vision for your downtown and movement and momentum for redevelopment activities, and not talk about it, but actually get things in place, and helping you as a governing body find consensus and see that big picture, and recognizing the unique nature of your districts, but recognizing the kind of the one Laredo focus as well. Some other ones that came up in this first 1 to 3 years, a more formalized council member orientation program. That may be of interest to a number of you as candidates, because once you come on board, I think I said yesterday, the city machine doesn't stop. You come on board and you're dealing with budgets, you're dealing with actions, you may not have all the history, and how do you get folks up to speed, especially given the nature of the number of transitions that might take place. And as we talked yesterday, there was some discussion about maybe, not that it's the manager's role, but it'd be something that would be involving the operation of the city, looking at your charter, ordinances, policies, and procedures, make sure there's some uniformity and consistency in place there. And then certainly, as that person comes on board, developing relationships both within the organization and with the community as a whole. As I said, the nature of the public position. So those were some of the major priorities that you all identified as well. I thought it would be helpful to at least talk a little bit from when I mentioned about the ICMA CM program, the Credentialed Manager Program. As part of that, ICMA has identified these 18 different core areas that they feel a successful manager has to build their talent and expertise in. And so some of these things are maybe worded a little differently than what I heard, but staff effectiveness, policy facilitation, functional expertise, planning, citizen service, performance management, those, I'm not going to read through them all, but I think you're going to see some of those, if not most of those, reflected in some of the comments that I heard from you from the interviews. And so I just thought that would be helpful for you to kind of see as far as what the trade association thinks are the main skill sets that a successful manager needs to possess to be effective in their positions. And then I wanted to identify, as I said, we do a lot of searches and do a lot of work for city managers and city councils across the organization, across the country. These are some other things that I just wanted to put in front of you that you might be wanting to consider that hopefully would resonate with you as well as your citizenry. Emotional intelligence is something that really didn't come out through the conversations, but I'm telling you, it's becoming, especially as we move into different demographics, is becoming so critical, as to recognizing you can have all the skill sets and credentials and expertise, but if you can't talk to people and understand people, this is a people-related business. It's a relationship-related business. And so we're seeing a lot of communities really emphasizing the need, and as we work through the candidate processes, how do you gauge whether they've got a strong emotional intelligent background to be able to navigate the things that you're dealing with. We've spoken about recruitment, retention, succession planning, economic development, certainly. Many of your candidates may come with some strong economic development backgrounds. Some of them may be certified economic community development professionals as well. Those would be credentials that you would sometimes see. More and more, we're finding that the manager and communities are asking the manager to really help lead and support community engagement. It gets back to quality of life. Many of your residents spoke about they've chosen here, they want to be here, they're invested here, and they're yearning for an opportunity to be engaged with their local government in maybe new and different ways. And so some cities do that really effectively, some don't do it at all. And so, that's something that some communities I really find they're looking for that in their manager as well. I want us to talk about, and a number of you referenced this issue about the dynamics of the board. A skill set that didn't necessarily get articulated. It talked a little bit about helping to find consensus. It's boardsmanship abilities. How do you work with 9 personalities, help you gel and find consensus on matters, and come together and have you help cajole and find compromises where possible? It isn't always possible, but that's a skill set. That's not something that anybody really trains you in. You learn that through the business. So many a times managers that have had that experience, or assistants or department heads that have, like planning and zoning directors, for example, often work with their planning and zoning boards or their planning boards. They have to work with that. Those are skill sets it's uniquely training that you get, and so those are things that are pretty strong. We talk about budgeting, capital planning, talk about strategic planning, capital project management overall. Another one that didn't necessarily come up, but I will tell you, I think I heard kind of in the underpinnings of it, but we're also seeing it as it relates to recruitment and retention, is diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. You employ a lot of people. It's a factor. It certainly has been elevated, especially over the last several years. There are organizations that are dealing with it front and center. There are other organizations that really haven't had much experience with it. My sense is, given the cultural diversity of the community and the dynamics and your demographics, that would be an important element for you to consider. We talked about process improvement, talked about communication skills. Intergovernmental relations, you don't have a lot of other sister cities around you, but you are a major international port, meaning you certainly have relationships across the border. But what does that look like elsewhere in the state, elsewhere in the federal government? The manager doesn't play the politics, but they're expected to help you facilitate conversations with elected officials and being the subject matter expert to help you in those conversations, whether it's capital, international, trade, whatever that looks like. And then we talked about utility management, we talked about ICMA, CM. So those are some other skill sets that I thought would, just for consideration. So let me talk, well, first let me stop there for a second. Anything that, I missed from you, first of all, hopefully I've captured your thoughts, at least the ones that were able to connect with me, but I just want to make sure, do we have kind of a general, I'm not saying it's all inclusive, as I said, this is a pretty rapid dive into the process, but anything there that maybe we've missed that you think would be important to identify?
The one thing that you did miss on a city manager is the ability to track projects from start to finish, and how to keep track of that.
That's that
Now,
capital
again,
project management
yeah.
and process. There may not be capital, maybe other initiatives. Yeah.
Because over here on council, we have projects, and they just, if we're not pushing them, they're not getting done.
Gotcha. Okay. And so, just to be clear, it may be capital, but they may be initiatives, right? Is that what you're saying as well? Okay, so it's not just capital management. Okay, that's helpful to know. Appreciate that.
One other comment too on the intergovernmental, side. Yeah, the manager is helpful, but it primarily lies with the mayor.
Yep.
For example, I've taken that as my, when matters of, foreign relations, so to speak, with Mexico, Washington, they kind of look to the mayor, so the mayoral candidates pay close attention to that, and that's also, very important.
Yep.
Sometimes mayors are constricted some way by charter and council, but when it comes to foreign relations, the intergovernmental, I personally feel very, liberated, because I talk to these people frequently, and then once it crystallizes into something, then obviously council would make that decision. But short of that, I think the mayors, play a huge role in that aspect.
I appreciate let me unpack that even greater. I agree with you 100%. That's typically the role of the elected official. I will tell you, as a city manager, I typically would accompany my mayor and council on those items. I help facilitate the conversation in terms of making sure they're briefed on the topics, the issues, the challenges, and many times I'm asked to kind of fill in the gaps as you're having a conversation with an elected official at the federal or state level and they don't understand it. They sometimes want to understand the nuances behind it. And so it's not to replace that role, but it's to help facilitate and serve as a resource to it. And some managers are better at that than others. Absolutely. Yep, good point there. So let me talk a little bit about, we're getting feedback here, about what as I've heard your conversations, looked at this, certainly, and I've reflected some of this and just making some adjustments in this slide last night. Let me talk a little bit about the challenges you face in the search and some options for your consideration going forward. So if anyone walks in and tells you this is an easy job to recruit for, run away from that firm. I'm just telling you, because I've done this enough, we do this enough. This is not an easy recruitment. And the reason it's not an easy recruitment is certainly you've got some history. You've got FBI. And anytime FBI is involved and people are indicted and charged, that raises red flags. The city managers are a very strong ethic. Their commitment to ethics. I talked about the ICMA Code of Ethics yesterday. So that's going to raise red flags. Even though that's been in your past, it's still going to be out there. If you start Googling some background, that's going to be what candidates are going to see. We spoke a lot yesterday and today as well. You've had a higher than typical turnover. So, that raises a red flag on potential candidates to go further. And as a result, a sense of, what's the community's reputation outside of Laredo? How are you perceived by other communities in Texas or elsewhere? And so the searches that are real easy were those communities that have had long-term managers, no turnover on council, very stable, just the normal run-of-the-mill stuff that goes forward. Those are easy searches to do. I mean, you can be blindfolded and find you good candidates in that effort. That ain't where you're at right now. And I can't change that, and you can't change that. You just have to recognize it's part of the environment in which you're stepping into as you seek to find this next position. And so all that turmoil that's associated with that stuff is going to scare away some candidates right off the bat. They're going to say, I'm not going there. I've heard about that place. They don't, the turnover, man, I'm just not going. It's not, they're not going to be interested in that. Unless you make some conscious efforts to kind of address that and working with your recruiter to help them understand why they might want to rethink that position. So the other things that are happening, it may be viewed positively, it may be viewed negatively, is you're having conversations about potential charter changes. I don't know what that looks like yet. We've only spent a little bit of time on that. That's likely not going to happen overnight. But that's another red flag to a council or a potential candidate looking and saying, am I going to come in and they're going to change the structure and my authority overnight? I don't know what that is, but they're going to have that concern. So that's another kind of red flag that's out there as well. We spent yesterday talking about an element that is critical. I mean this, it is very critical. How you operate as a council or how your future council operates. But they don't know what your future looks like right now. They only know what there is in place. Will have a direct bearing on the quality of candidates that will apply. As I say, managers by their very nature are optimistic creatures. My wife says something happened in our DNA strain. We were in the embryo stage and something went awry because most people wouldn't do this job. It's just nature of the position. But we are generally optimistic and we generally have a can-do attitude that we can help fix things. But as I said yesterday, you can have the most qualified, skilled, exceptional city manager out there. And if you have a board that doesn't operate effectively, the manager is not going to be successful. How you deal with the policies and the direction and the governance of the organization will have a direct bearing not only on the quality of the candidates you select, but also in the ultimate success or failure of the community.
I think you need to repeat that again.
That's what I was talking about, good governance. The quality of your governance will dictate the quality of candidates, and do you walk the talk? You say, we want to be good governance, we want to exercise our responsibilities as policymakers, we're going to exercise the responsibility of the manager. That, in and of itself, is a significant factor on people, whether they're going to apply for this position or not. And this is unique nature. We've had this conversation about current council, new council. We don't know. We don't know what the new council is going to look like, the composition. But right now, all they're going to do is they're going to Google you, they're going to watch your meetings, they're going to watch your media reports, they're going to go to all the controversies, and they're going to get a sense of how you operate. Because council members as a whole will dictate the quality of ultimately the success of even the most qualified manager you got. They have to be hand in sync. If you want a good quality manager and you want to be successful, you have to have a good council as well. Not to say you're going to have one or two stray cats and issues that crop up. That's the nature of the beast. And not to say that managers that stay in communities, like myself, 12 years in one community, 15 years in another. I've had a number of people that have come and gone, but we had a culture in our organizations of how that governance process worked and that council-manager relationship worked. You can't change that overnight, but that's going to be a lens that people are going to look at, which is why we spent some time yesterday talking about governance, because you still got 5 months with the current council that you've got in place today, and you can make some changes there if ultimately that's where you want to go. This question also about, the last search, and a couple of your speakers spoke about as well, I've told you traditionally, even in the marketplace we're in now, traditionally about a 3-month window is what it takes to effectively, you can keep people engaged. It doesn't mean you might lose 1 or 2 people because they may have applied to another job ahead of yours and you might go. But if you're in that window, you can still be pretty competitive. I heard 6 months, 9 months, close to a year. You don't want to search that's protracted. You will not be able to keep good candidates in that process. So wherever we may go, and I'm going to give you some ideas about how you can start that, but not necessarily start your search in terms of recruiting candidates yet. But that's going to be a factor because everybody, you're going to start Googling city managers, start Googling, they're going to see what happened in the last search and wondering if that's going to be the case again. So, that's something you have to just recognize. So let me talk about the issue that's been kind of the 800-pound gorilla in the room about this. Is something you do now? Does the current council do this in the process or not? So I can tell you from searches that I've personally been involved with and SGR has been involved with, it is not uncommon that because of the mobility of city manager's profession, people come and go, and you may have elections coming forward, and there's always this debate about, does the current council do it or does the new council do it? And how does citizens committees be involved in all that? So, as I described earlier, given the dynamics that you've got in your community with some of the issues I've addressed earlier, my suspicion would be is that you could start a process, not start the actual search, but start the process of engaging your community, engaging your staff, engaging with you as elected officials, and perhaps engaging with your candidates out there. And I'll talk about how we've done that in some other areas that I've worked with, or other communities I've worked with as well, to capture that sense of what you're looking for, both current as well as future and community. And there'll be an intersection. Despite many of those items I suspect that I've identified will be, if you get 3 different circles, a lot of them are going to be in the middle where those circles overlap. So that doesn't mean that even though you don't know who's going to be on the council, there's probably attributes, experience, and backgrounds that will be in that center of that kind of Venn diagram, if you will. You can start that work, start the development of the brochure, get some comfort where you may want to do citizen public focus groups, you may want to do some surveys, whatever that process looks like. You can start that work now and having the benefit of you as existing council members and certainly the benefit of the community to go forward. What we have done in other searches, I'll give you an example. I did a search in Connecticut, which was moving from what's called a first selectman form of government, i.e. a strong mayor form of government, where the mayor or the first selectman basically served as the administrative head of the organization. And then they were moving to a formal council manager form of government. So the current selectman was not going to be in that role going forward after the election, and some of the council members weren't going to be there because they were rolling off. And they had a search committee process, and we also had candidates that were running for various slots. And so what we did in that search that you might want to consider is that we started the community background, the outreach, developed the brochure, and we launched the search while the current council was still in play, including the first selectman. When we did the triage process, the current council was there, but we also invited, it was a public meeting, but we also specifically invited all the council candidates that were running for office to that meeting so they could see the presentation, the triage presentation of the pool of candidates that were identified. And we actually got feedback not only from the council, but the folks that were involved in potentially running for it. And there was agreement of where they thought those highest quality candidates were involved with, recognizing that not all your candidates are going to be office, but they at least saw that and they saw the quality in the candidate background. Then what we've done is, as I said in our process, once you're selected as a semifinalist, we have them do video interviews, the questionnaire responses, and the LexisNexis process, things like that. What we try to do is cycle that so that the semifinalists were selected by the current council with this collaborative effort with your community so that everybody got a chance to kind of weigh in on that. And then we waited until after the results, the candidates did that work, but we timed it such that there wasn't an extended period of time. The new council was elected, they were seated, and we had the new council then, out of that pool of semifinalists, say, okay, now they're reviewing that material, and they made the selection of who the finalists should be. So that meant that they had skin in the game, and I will tell you, the challenge you face if you don't do that, given the window of, and it's not like you've got 1 or 2 people, you've got potentially a majority of your council shifting. Most strong city manager candidates are not going to want to be selected by a board only to know by the time they actually get seated there's going to be a different majority on the board. They just aren't going to do that. I'm not saying every candidate, but most candidates, think of it from their standpoint, they want to know who they're working for. And that relationship's got to be strong. And if they haven't been selected, they haven't met, they haven't interviewed, that's a red flag. So at a minimum, regardless of wherever you start this process, my suggestion would be is you start it under the process I've just outlining so that you have the benefit of wisdom and experience, but you also have feedback from other parties. You have agreement, you advertise, you time that such that you can have that selection process being done in an open, transparent fashion of your semifinalists, and then wait for your next board once they are officially seated to make the final selection. Your candidates will feel much more comfortable with that because they know that they've been selected by the group that they're ultimately going to be interviewing with and ultimately going to be hired by. And so what that means is you don't have to wait until that process goes forward. If you're comfortable with this approach, you can start it early enough and still get the insight, but the ultimate skin in the game will be the selection of your finalists, of those 3 to 5 folks, and your new council would be involved in that effort. So that would be something that I would recommend you consider, that you talk through. I want to just go through a couple other points, and then I'll open it up for conversation because I know there's going to be a bunch of questions about this. I know in the past, in talking with staff, and I've heard it referenced here as well, there are any number of stakeholder involvement points that we see in our city manager searches. I talked earlier this morning about kind of the 3-legged stool: staff, council and the community. Many of the searches we have, we will have, I always say, we always have at least the senior staff involved in some interviews. I'm not asking them to rank candidates. I'm asking them to identify strengths and weaknesses. Ultimately, it's your role as the council to hire the manager. And I never want to put you and staff or your community in odds in that area. So what we do is we go through a facilitated process and have staff interview, and then I'll talk about strengths and weaknesses or potential areas that we'd want to explore with each candidate differently with a council. In many communities, we also have citizen panels that do that. So they have a chance to be involved, whether that's stakeholders or you all select one or two or whatever that looks like. In some places, we've had multiple panels involved. You don't want to make it too elaborate, but it's another touch point. And given your community's interest in being involved in this issue, that's something I've worked with on a number of my communities as well, and it can give you some comfort and feedback as ultimately the new board comes on board. So that's something we want to talk about. The other issue I talked earlier, and I mentioned, if someone comes in and tells you it's an easy search, that you're just going to find candidates, you're going to have to do some incredible passive candidate outreach for this position, given the dynamics that I've talked about earlier. And if you don't, you're not going to get necessarily, you're going to get some candidates who are qualified, don't get me wrong, but you may be missing some really exceptional candidates that are up for a challenge, but that takes a whole different relationship with your recruiting firm and your candidates to get into that, to talk to pools of candidates and saying, listen, I've known you from a previous search, I know you're not job hopping, this is something I think could be a great opportunity, here's what you've got and here's why I think you ought to be considering it. That's going to be a critical skill for you to attract the best and brightest with all the other dynamics we've got in place. And then last but not least, we talked about you're going to have to offer competitive packages, compensation, contracts, severances, things of that nature because of all the other issues that I've just identified as well. So let me stop there. I've given you a lot of stuff to kind of think through. You may have some thoughts and opinions. Let's just kind of talk through those. So I'll open it up to the board.
Yeah, given your strong suggestion that some of these candidates for a city manager would not consider this seriously until such time as the next board is in place, or city council board. What kind of timing do you see? Do you have a suggested timing mechanism that we can kind of look at?
So help me understand this. My understanding is you get November elections, you get a lot of people running, so the likelihood of one or more runoff elections is likely to occur. When does your runoff election occur? If your election is early November, with the general election.
First or second week in December?
First or second week in December, okay. And then,
There's runoffs,
okay, so, and then those, whether that involves one or more seats, so after I'd say mid-December basically is where you're at, you're going to know who your new council is going to be. When do they get seated after that? Pardon?
By January 1st, they should be seated.
January, okay, gotcha.
And
So,
it's usually when the votes are canvassed.
and canvassed, and
Yeah.
sure, right. I'm just trying to understand, every place does this a little bit differently,
But
so.
a safe
Like-
assumption, I think, would be the first part of January. Yeah.
Okay, so in a rough sense, what I'm telling you is that from my experience in working with other communities, advertising for the position when there is an election taking place is not the problem. As long as you time it, it's not going to take too long. Candidates are going to know who the next council, and that's who they're going to ultimately be selected as finalists and interviewed with. So I would time that such that you would probably not start the search till sometime in November, when you actually hit the marketplace. You can still get all the other work done and be ready to hit go, but you're probably going to want to deal with that search starting in November so that your current board can still be involved in the selection process. If that's your desire, that can be involved in at least selecting the semifinalists, the bigger pool. But you wait until the outcome of the election is fully known. And you got to sequence that so you don't have too much time between semifinalists and selection of finalists and then the interview process. So I would say probably November, and the other issue you got to deal with is holidays and vacations and all that.
Starting the interview process.
Starting the advertising for the position. Advertising for the position. That would be sometime in November to allow you to, so we'd be candid with in the brochure we'd say elections are occurring, and whatever, assuming you went with this recommendation, current council coupled with a transparent process is going to select the semifinalists. Finalists will be selected from that pool by the new seated council. So we just have to time the sequencing of that so that we could at least have the semifinalist material being completed and then be ready for the new council to be seated to review that material and have that conversation on who their finalists are going to be. So if you time that so that you're not stretching that out, you won't lose candidates in that effort. That way, I've heard a number of people say, listen, we can't afford to wait. Some say, don't make the final. I think it's a compromise that makes sense, and I will tell you as a recruiter, it can work, because I've seen it work in a number of other communities we've done. So just food for thought on that.
Okay, and then the new city manager would be seated when? Do you think the latter part of January?
It depends upon who you get. Once again, I have no idea who your candidate is, who your final candidate is, where they're coming from, what parameters they've got, and they're moving from across the country, what contractual obligations, if they got 30, 60, 90 days to release themselves from their current obligations. I don't know what that looks like. Generally between, I would say 45 to 60 days is kind of an average, but that all depends on the unique circumstances of the individual. And if you want them to start up sooner, sometimes they move in before the rest of their family relocates, but then that becomes a negotiation for temporary housing and things like that, Jeff. So I don't know what that would be, but assume somewhere around 45 to 60 days on average. It can be shorter, it can be longer, depending on the final candidate selected.
Okay, as far as incentives, signing bonuses, packages for all
So,
sorts of-
yeah, and I didn't include that here because that's kind of another level, and I just said kind of put it under the competitive nature. You're going to have to, we'll look at your marketplace, we'll look at, what the cost of living is, we'll give you some ideas and thoughts and recommendations on what we think that position should be marketed at. So not that we necessarily advertise that rate, but I need to know that as I'm talking to candidates because a number of them will ask that background. Typically, it's your it's going to be your salary, your retirement. Sometimes there's a kicker retirement. I know your Texas municipal retirement system right here. And sometimes there's supplemental retirements that come with a manager's element. Severance will be a discussion. I will tell you, especially given the nature you've got. It's always an agreement. It's always there. That's a point we're going to have to get a handle on. When we advertise for these positions, we ask the candidates. Generally tell us about what your salary and benefit expectations would be. We'll know that before they're presented to you as potential candidates if you're interested in saying, listen, if you want to go with this candidate, they're probably going to be looking for a higher level or a different severance than what you might have traditionally offered. But we'll know that going into the effort. I don't want to get caught in the weeds, but we'll work with you. If we're selected, we'll work with you to help structure and as we have those conversations. What are your salary expectations? What are we hearing? These are the type of benefits, so that doesn't hit you at the 11th hour. That's known at the front end of the discussions.
So, just to clarify, so I guess what I'm hearing is we should be prepared to let the new council make the final selection, but not necessarily wait to start the process until the new council comes in. So we have a lot of kind of things that we need to work on as far as some of our mission statement, our vision statement and things like that. As a city and as a council and some of our procedures and some of the things that you talked about in the presentation, to get ready for opening up for that position around October-ish timeframe. We should be ready to send out that we're hiring and then be ready to hire around January, more or less. That sounds like a reasonable timeline?
Yeah, I'm thinking, now, the challenge you got with that window, the 3-month window, November, December, and some, you're late October, November, December, but you've got the holidays. We're going to have to just deal with that because for all practical purposes, everything comes to a screeching halt between Christmas.
So it'll push us to February,
So,
more or less?
no, I think you can make this work in that January, that you could be interviewing shortly after the new year if you time the sequencing of this right. Because you're just not going to be able to get candidates to come in for interviews, nor are you going to want. Your community's involved in holidays and everything else, and so that's just the challenge. But I also have heard you all say, and I've heard your community say, we can't afford to wait. So if you wait till January, then you're into January, February, March, and then April. You're almost a year out from where you're at today. I don't know that serves you well as well. So my sense is we can help you in the process we've done, help you get that foundational work done well and make sure you've got feedback that there hopefully is a pretty good agreement of what you're looking for in the candidate. Start that process, be involved in the selection, but then wait till your new council, and you don't lose basically 5 months or something in the process by waiting for your new council.
I've got two other people, and go ahead, Mr. Trevino.
So at the very best, the city's looking at going without a city manager for about 6 months. How about the rest of the 5 vacancies in management?
So what I will tell you and what we encourage is in a go ahead if you want to jump in.
I've still got a couple of days, guys.
So here's the recommendation I tell my candidates that are in that area, because invariably you're going to have some vacancies. I typically encourage the community to the extent possible and feasible, to hold off on making permanent appointments, because those are direct reports of the new manager, and the new manager has an opportunity to build their team. I say that with the following caveat. If you're in a position where you need to fill it, you have a gap, you've got, qualified candidates, and you can't afford to hold off, don't run the risk of demoralizing the organization by not filling it. So there may be some positions, you got a number of vacancies, some they're just critical. You need leadership, you need direction. Somebody wins I used to say get hit by the bus, they win the lottery tomorrow and they're gonna be gone, you gotta be able to still keep the wheels on the wagon. So my encouragement is hold off to the extent you can, but not to the detriment of maintaining operations. Pardon? Yeah, as I said, there are critical hires that need to go forward. You just don't have the authority to do that, and that's the nature of the beast. So.
Okay, yeah, two others.
I'm sorry, Keith, did you have something else you want to add on
Okay.
that? I know you were kind of I jumped in on that one.
No, good with the caveat.
Okay, that's it. As I said, yeah, you understand.
Those two.
So basically, in January, the new council will be full-time in searching for the city manager.
What I'd suggest is that at that point, the groundwork of selecting semifinalists through this process that I've outlined, which hopefully has got some understanding of key attributes, desired background, skill sets, that work is all done, and then the newly seated council will be reviewing that material and then selecting their finalists. And then at that point, then several weeks after that is when the actual interview process would take place, because we have to do criminal history, credit, background, all the other exercises that may be involved. But the selection of 3 to 5 is normally what we see for finalists would be done by the new council, not the current council.
Very important for the citizens is to make sure that they choose someone who's going to dedicate time to this large task.
Recognizing the fact that, excuse me, for some of you have been involved in the search process, you know what it's like. Just take this into account. Let's assume I've got 12 to 15 semifinalists that have been selected through this effort. They're going to have cover letters, resumes, probably 4 video interviews, and a response to a written questionnaire that's 20 to 25 questions. You're going to have to dedicate some time to reviewing that material so that you can make a conscious decision of who the strongest candidates are that you want to bring on board. So yes, it is right off the bat, as a newly elected official, you're going to have to dedicate some time to get through that, because this, as I said yesterday, I don't know if you were here yesterday or not, this is one of the most important things you do as an elected official, is selecting your city manager. Absolutely. But that would be on their docket shortly after the newly council was seated, under what I've suggested.
Right, I think there's another question.
Just one comment, we keep talking about the urgency, yet, the fact remains, we've gone through 5 city managers, in about 5 or 6 years, which tells me that we haven't done as good a job as we should have done in
Foresight and alliance.
or managing them, or respecting them, or whatever you want to say. So I'm of the opinion that, yes, we need to hurry, but we don't need to pave the road with flat squirrels. You mentioned that being, decisive is very, very important. But sometimes tapping into your wisdom is just as important, because you can decide quick, and you can become one of those squirrels that becomes part of the asphalt.
Sure.
Or you can say, you know what, I've got some experience here, these cars will flatten me, let me wait a little bit, and it might be the same thing here. We've got some people that are capable of keeping us afloat or steering the ship, while we go through this very, very important process. And I just have to emphasize, shame on us for going through so many city managers in such a short period, because we weren't able to select or work with the right ones.
Right. It's not for me to say which way to go. If you want to wait for the new one, my city manager training is always give you options. So as I heard this discussion back and forth, that's an option, I think, that gets you so that you're not delaying the decision. And I'm not saying if we're ultimately selected to do the search, we're going to do that homework. We're going to give you a product that you're comfortable with, and the process the T's and the I's will be crossed and dotted. We also provide a guarantee. If someone goes through our entire process and they leave for whatever reason, within 18 months, we redo the search with no professional fee. There's expenses, but so I don't want you to say, I'm not recommending something that I'm not comfortable with, but the policy of where you want to go. The other alternative is then you wait till January and start the process, and you're into next summer by the time somebody's here. Yeah.
You're fully capable of guiding the city and providing all the information that we need. The other part of the equation is, well, we take that information and truly work with it in the best, most responsible way.
I understand. It's got to be a partnership between the client and your firm. Absolutely. I understand. Yep. And I will tell you, just to that point, because you can imagine, we work with communities and councils all over the place. That's part of what we do, is help facilitate, just as we're doing today, help facilitate that conversation. Ultimately, you as a community, the council, current or future, is going to be the final selection. We are here to help you identify strengths and weaknesses of candidates so that you may fall in love with a given candidate. It's my job to tell you, I appreciate those skill sets. Here's some areas they're weak in. They're not as strong as some of the other folks are. At the end of the day, that's your decision, not mine, but it's my job to point out where I think you may be missing or having blind spots as your recruiter. I just want to give you assurance. That's the nature of what you get in terms of that's the services we try to provide. Yes.
You obviously aren't a flattened squirrel yet, so.
I may have lost a lot of hair, but I haven't been hit by a car yet, so knock on, so.
Yeah, Ms. Ramos,
I just want to tell you that the executive search firms really facilitate for our council, our boards. They're the ones that have the experience of the recruitment, of looking at the employees, and doing all the quote-unquote dirty little work that they have to do by screening the applicants and reviewing them. Now, I'm going to tell you that when we were looking for a city manager previously, I emailed all of the council on that particular time, and I said, find yourself an executive search firm, and you will find a way to get this done correctly, precisely, and it'll benefit the city.
yeah.
But some of you were not on that council when the other manager was selected. The experience that we've had selecting a president twice, using an executive search firm has really helped us out. Because we were able to look at the candidates, they provided the candidates for us, they screened the candidates, they brought them all together. That committee that reviewed the candidates' applications went ahead and talked to them previously. There's a different procedure. In our case, once we select a candidate, we have to wait 21 days before we make final confirmation. That is a law from the state of Texas for governing boards, for the school districts, and for the colleges. And so, really important that any organization, executive search firm will help you, guide you, lead you to the right direction, and whatever decision you all make, it is a timely process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Okay, anyone else? Yes, Mr. Vish?
Mayor, I've heard from him and I have a couple of concerns. And number one, I have full faith in them. We had a search committee, but we had a group before also, but we had a search committee. My question to you all is, are we going to have a fellow, a search committee, and then the council? I know you can't answer that right now, but I'm asking that because to me, if the city council is going to have a search committee, that's going to be basically guided by the people of your own opinions, your friends. So that didn't go well last time. So my question is, are we going to have something in between? He's going to give us 5 good candidates, and the search committee is going to say, oh, we don't like any of them, but this person is better. Is that going to happen? Or we are going to trust him? And I'm already giving you the thought, okay? You haven't got it yet, I know that. Are we going to trust them to give us the right candidate and then we evaluate them and say who is better? I think that's important because they are putting another layer here, which to me last time did not work. That's why I'm bringing that. Now, when I came here, I was very skeptical of starting this process. After hearing him, and I have heard other people also, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done here before we actually hire somebody. So I'm okay. I'm one of your strong you have to listen to me, sir. That's what I'm trying to say. So we can start the process, but as long as you are aware of there's an election and my two people are coming in, and we are going to make the final decisions only in January or so, there's no reason to wait till January to start the process. We start the process,
Yeah.
get ready.
So if I understand you correctly, Mr. Bishop, I can summarize a little bit, is your concern is that whatever list, be it them or whoever the firm may be that presents that semifinalist?
The way I proposed it is we'd be triaging candidates, and you would be selecting the semifinalists, the 12 to 15 out of the pool that's together. I'm suggesting that can be done in a very transparent fashion. Many of the times we do that.
Is that a committee going to do that?
No, typically the
That's a
hiring
decision
authority
we have to-
does that, and ultimately, because, now, so let me go through a process here. I've given you kind of our standard approach. I can tell you I've done this differently in a variety of different communities. I've had some communities that have said, we want you to pick the top 12 or 15 that you think are the strongest based on the attributes and all the background that everybody's agreed to, and then go from there, and then the process so they don't get to see all the candidates, they only see the most qualified based on who we think, based on our insights on what you're looking for. I have also done searches. I will tell you, I got the impression, I don't want to misstate this, I had the impression that the way it was done the last time, that there was a citizens panel that reviewed, screened, and ultimately recommended the final candidate. Is that a fair statement? I will tell you is that, I will tell you that as a professional recruiter, I would have concerns with that process as it relates to attracting candidates, because your candidates aren't going to have a relationship ongoing with your selection committee, but they are expected to have a relationship with your seated city council. And so a candidate is going to have a real red flag in their mind that I'm being selected and nominated by a group, and I'm not even engaging with the people that are going to be my bosses. So I'll tell you that's a red flag. Now, let me give you an example of a community I had to work with for a large community in Iowa that had the most convoluted charter process to select a city manager and how we navigated it and made it work. In that case, first of all, their council was a group of 11. All 11 came up for election every 2 years. So you know, a unique environment where the whole board could turn over every 2 years. But their process was the mayor was required to submit, or required by their charter to develop a committee that would be involved in reviewing the candidates for the city administrator role. It's called city administrator there. And they would make a recommendation of up to 3 candidates, of which the mayor then could make a single decision of those 3 who he or she would nominate to the full council for consideration of adoption. So the council was kind of neutered from the process. And I said, folks, I can adhere to your charter, but you've got the same sort of problem. The candidates aren't related to the people that ultimately they're going to have to work with, only the mayor. So in that case, I suggested what we did there is that we would work with the citizens committee that the mayor had identified, and then we would also work with the council as a whole. And fortunately, if our process is right, the strongest candidates rise to the top. They agreed generally on the candidates. We added 1 or 2 extras, as I recall, based on one or the other wanting to do it. They were the semifinalists, and then when we did the interview process, we still had the citizens panel by charter make their thoughts and recommendations, but I also involved all the council members in the interview process separately so that they could come together. It all worked out. They selected the right candidate, or they came to consensus on who it was, and we meet agreement. But the concern I would have as your recruiter, as it relates to the quality of the candidates that have come, candidates are going to be very reluctant to apply for a position where they're being screened and recommended by a citizens committee and never really engaging with you until the 11th hour. Because their relationship, candidates are evaluating you as much as you're evaluating them. And if you don't get them, you don't get involved as the elected body and the hiring authority at the right stage, they're going to say thanks but no thanks. So maybe we're in agreement on the issues, but there's ways to work around that and still involve citizen panels. We just have to kind of adjust it as necessary.
I'd like to chime in on that. The last time we had this search committee, we listened to the vocal minority, because that's what your group was, a vocal minority. And we listened to that, and we all, as a council, created a citizens committee, and it wasn't a padded. I have trouble with that word, in a padded Because a lot of the people that were on the committee were either CEOs or people that had hired a lot of people in their capacity as, in their job of where they were, or in their position of where they. So these were people that we deemed, but we all took a step back and let the committee work. The committee came up with a number one, a number two, and a number three. We wound up hiring the number one. We probably should have hired the number two, who was sitting over there. Anyway, but that happened, and as you stop to ponder upon it, we are the Citizens Committee here. I got elected by a bunch of citizens from my district, and so did he and her, and all of us. So we are a Citizens Committee. As much as the vocal groups are out there saying, oh, you guys are padding and you guys are, no. We are the Citizens Committee, and that's why we sit in this chair, so we can make those decisions. So I would be in favor of who's gonna make that selection or who's gonna do the interview is this committee right in here.
I'm in agreement that ultimately for quality candidates to be considering this position, they're gonna wanna know that they are invested with you as much as you as a hiring authority are invested with them. That being said, I work with some communities where that's the only interview in addition to senior staff and maybe a public meet and greet, but I've also worked with communities that have a variety of committees and representation involved that can be very elaborate to very simple and everything in between. I'm just saying we can help you coordinate what that looks like. The point that I want to make sure resonates with you is ultimately that decision to hire the person needs to be the council, and they have to be the one to make that final call and the decision, and your candidates are going to expect that. They're not going to expect that to be made by someone else saying, here's the candidate that we think you should hire, and that's the only person that you consider.
If I may comment on this.
And I don't have any issues with starting the process, and I get the 90-day, I don't have an issue with starting the process and let the new council come in and make that selection. That's perfectly fine too. I mean,
Yes.
but it has to be.
If I may chime in, as was spoken about yesterday, the same issue was brought up about these committees. And what was said yesterday makes a lot of sense. We were the people that were voted in by our people. At the end of the day, we need to answer to our constituents because they're calling us. They're not calling the committee members. They're not calling anybody else but us. We need to answer to them. And that was a really good point that was made yesterday. I think it was Mr. Picasso, I think it was.
We talked about, well, we also talked about
We talked about it
representation, that,
So,
as a
but
representative
he
democracy.
had a point. We are the ones ultimately that answer to our community because we were voted to be here by our community and our members.
One point that I do want to make, and I think it's crucial, the existing council will select, will approve what now?
As I suggested,
10,
for
12
consideration,
12
the
candidates?
semifinalists would be selected by you as a board,
Which would be how many?
typically 12 to 15 folks.
Okay, 12 to 15. And
Yeah,
then
8 to
the-
12 to 15,
I think we'll
depending
be
on
lucky
where
if
there's
we get 12
consensus.
to 15.
Yeah.
Yeah, the more you pick, the more homework you've got, so I reckon it. Don't pick just for the sake of picking.
Okay, but then the actual council will select the finalists? No, the then council.
Would then,
the
out of
actual-
that 8 to 12 to 15, whatever you ultimately select as a semifinalist pool, all that material would be reviewed by the newly seated council,
that-
and they would select typically 3 to 5
See, the
finalists.
concern that I would, or at least people may view this is that politics may sit in, and then we may have to, the current council will delete or exclude candidates that some way, somehow, politically doesn't fit, this council's, criteria, yeah.
So, and
We
that,
want a larger pool, obviously, to get to the new council.
right, and I'm gonna tell you, the reason I know that seems a little daunting when I say 8 to 12 to 15 is that although if we're selected, we're gonna do our best to help you find passive candidates, and there'll be certainly some of those in the pool, but a number of your candidates are gonna be involved in other searches. And so if you select only 6 semifinalists, I've had it where even though they've been semifinalists, they've completed the work, 3 of them have gotten another job in the meantime because they're in another search, and now you're down to, 1 or 2 folks, and you're going, is that a fair process? So I typically say select a few more because you're going to lose some. And 2 reasons. Number 1, when they apply, they're simply putting skin in the game by putting their cover letter and the resume and some background information. If you're going to go through our search, we're asking candidates to do the next level. You got to put time into video interviews. You got to put time into the questionnaire responses and things of that nature. Most of our candidates tell you we've worked harder in an SDR search than any other search we've been involved with. But they've also said, from a client standpoint, you get more information, and from their standpoint, they become a little more emotionally invested in the job. And so the likelihood of them bailing after they become a semifinalist and completed that work is different by the time they're a finalist. Now, some of those folks are saying, I don't want the job that badly, I don't want to go through all that, I'm going to lose, which is why I'd recommend you have a little more than a few semifinalists, so.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing is that there's not going to be another in-between committee, right? That's what you are thinking at this stage.
Well, we haven't decided, we need an action, a council agenda item.
If I can say 1 second, I have something to say. Mr. Martinez, you talked about a minority came and talked about at that time. The minority actually said something was not right, which proved to be true in a year later because the manager did not succeed. So maybe if the minority was prepared at that time, they could have avoided it. So sometimes the minority says something. It may not be what we want to hear. You know, we hear that so that you can say, you know what, maybe we are making a mistake here. Think it again. At that time, you all made a decision to hire someone. In my opinion, a year later, it was the wrong choice. He said that then, he said that then wrong. But it's not like the minority is not cooperating.
No, that's, and I think your point is well taken. I don't want to get into an argument.
No, it's point well taken.
Because when you're making a new manager, you have to make sure we are hiring the right person.
Yeah, yeah, that's fine. I think, yeah, you made your point. I think we understand it. So what else do we need? No, no, no,
Well, there's actually, there's not much more. I would tell you,
We're done.
yeah, the next thing is really kind of next steps that I've got. I don't think we're going to have time on the other issues. I know I've got a flight to catch in a little while, but I don't want to, unless you want to have me stay an extra night, which I suspect you don't want to do. But so I really wanted to just, I'm giving you some options. I'm not saying this is the way to go. If you wanted to proceed, I've given you some ways to do that as a recruiter, I could tell you can work. And I think address the issues that you've been kind of grappling with, but
So
if
Rosario,
ultimately
I
you
think at the
decide you
next
want to wait,
meeting,
that's your call
We'll
as
have an
well.
agenda item to discuss
I have a
this.
question. I have one question. You mentioned earlier in your presentation about, sorry, going back to that's one of the slides here, but you said something about a conference in 2
Oh, the
weeks.
CLG, yeah, yeah.
What was that?
It's the Innovations Group, and it's going to be in Austin, Texas, not next week, but the following week. It's a week-long conference, and if you want some information, I'll be glad I'll provide it to Keith's team, and they can spread it out as well. These are the leading, so we're hosting it. SGR, as I said, we do more than recruit. We do a full-service type firm. The Innovations Group is an extension of our Strategic Foresight Program, which is that forward thinking. Innovations Group has been something that ICMA developed years ago, and it typically was leading edge communities across the country that are always looking at future issues and new technology, new innovation. So we were asked by that group to take over that operation as SGR. So it's a separate nonprofit division within our company. We're going to have our strategic foresight team certainly making presentations as part of the research, above and beyond some of the stuff that you saw today. We're also, for our conferences, we typically are looking at both public and private sector leading organizations that are doing innovative things in their operations, whether it's workforce, recruitment, retention, whatever that looks and feels like. So the mixture of the speakers involve both public sector and private sector thought leaders and this is the first time the group has come back together since COVID has come together, and certainly under SGR's umbrella.
Because one of the things that for me, is just being on here is I see that I want to thank the community for coming out and the candidates for coming out and being engaged in this process. I think we have a lot of a really tight-knit community. We do have a lot of positives here in Laredo. People that come here have even said, the city grows on me, the traffic's not that bad, even though they probably haven't been on Mines Road, but
and in the afternoons,
and you won't have to as much, like if you're the city manager, you won't have to drive on Mines Road that much, but more than likely, but yeah, just unless you're gonna go play golf at the max, but there's a lot of good things about our city, and what I'm hearing is that, all of us here on council made an effort to be here and get information and we're trying to grow and we're trying to improve and we have a lot of work to do, and I think what's important for us, next steps moving forward, is just to kind of get ourselves in order. We've got some statements that we need to come up with and some policies and some best practices, but We'd like to continue this process on our end, but then at the same time, look into ways that we can improve. So that's why I was asking about this
Sure.
conference, so.
I'll make sure Keith and the team get some information he can share with you if you're interested. There's still, registration's still available, but it's basically in 2 weeks. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, from there.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
I really left you at this point as far as next steps. That's kind of the nature. Hopefully, I've hit, what we were trying to get a handle on. I apologize, we ran out of time on some of the governance issues. You want to come back and redo something, we can work with Keith and the team to figure that out. But basically, what I was trying to do is adapt to what I've heard in the last, 48 hours about ways you could proceed and I think get you there, and that we, I believe, can be managed effectively in your recruitment process overall. But ultimately, the decision's gonna be yours, and, whoever you select will follow that lead.
From my standpoint, I think at least I personally gained so much from you and your presentation. So I guess the next step is just to see what council wants. We'll visit with our managers, and then take it from there. I think we've gained so much.
Great.
Yeah, anyone else from council that would like to? Oh, okay. Sure.
I want to congratulate the council on being here. I know Dr. Martinez, I'm sure, probably got some things he had to deal with, but congratulations on being here. This is the first step in learning. I don't think any of us are, possess all the knowledge and wisdom that we need to have, but this is the first, step in expanding our minds on what it's really going to take to select the most qualified person, for the next position. The gentleman mentioned opinions, and there's a lot of them. But I think what we need to do is be careful that our opinions coincide with the community's real needs. And he's obviously done a good job of, mentioning what those are, included water at the end. He also mentioned the opinion that everything is okay, and we tend to have that, perception or mindset about our cities because we love our cities, and it's like your own children. Other people see when they're misbehaving, but you don't because that's mijito or mijita, and they don't do anything bad. But we need to really, really get past that and say, where are our problems, recognize them, and do something about them. It's, there's an organization here in Laredo, Keep Laredo Beautiful, and I admire the work that they do. My pet peeve is littering. I can't stand it. When my kids were growing up, if I heard the window go down, I'd say, hey, if they were gonna toss something out, that just didn't happen in my household. But Keep Laredo Beautiful implies that it's already beautiful. And if we drive down the streets and everything, I think all of us know better. There's a lot of trash out there. For some reason, people think that it's okay to let it blow out of your trash can, out of the back of your pickup truck. For some reason, it's okay, and it's not. If we're going to select or continue to select city councilmen from this city, like we have the last 5 times, or from the border, I'd like to suggest that we get rid of the golden parachute. If we're not going to be interested in truly attracting and considering out-of-town candidates, then there's no need for that golden parachute. I know you mentioned that the only way to get people to commit to being a candidate is, to have some sort of protection, some sort of a package for them and everything, but that costs the taxpayers a lot of money, and that's the reason I'm saying it. As far as selecting the next city manager, I like to compare it to an admiral on an aircraft carrier. And I think most everybody here is familiar with an aircraft carrier. The planes come in, take off, whatever. A good admiral can command any aircraft carrier. A good city manager can handle any city. We all here have these personal beliefs that our city's unique, that we're on the border, that our culture's different. It's a city. It's a business, and it needs to be run like a business. Forget, I was on the last committee, and I was a little disappointed when I began to hear prematurely, I'd like a city manager who is gonna care about the river. I'd like a city manager who's gonna address the stray dogs, I'd like a city manager who knows our culture. I could care less if the next city manager knows what a plate of enchiladas is. As long as that person can conduct themselves in Austin and in Washington, like I've said before,
and can lead the council and tap into, you know, all of your knowledge and all the department heads, that's what I'm looking for. If they can speak Spanish, great. If they don't, that's perfectly okay. That's perfectly okay. I have a brother-in-law, Luis de Gornaz, graduated from Nixon High School in 1971. He went to A&M and joined the Air Force. And I'm telling you this because it's a perfect example of what I just said, that a good city manager can lead any city. He progressed in the Air Force, entered as a second lieutenant, ended up as a full colonel, one step away from a brigadier general, and he served in the Air Force, bases in Colorado, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and he did a fantastic job. And I don't think in his interviews everybody was, you know, worried about where he was from. They knew his reputation, they knew his background, they knew his record. And he served very, very well and did a good job, so well that he retired at 44 as a full colonel and went to work for Northrop Grumman, a big supplier to the U.S. government. So what I'm trying to say is, please, please keep an open mind. Our next city manager doesn't have to be from here. If we have a candidate that is the best candidate here locally, great. But if we don't, it's okay, people. Let's open our minds. Let's welcome people from out of town. McAllen has an advantage in the Valley because they have a lot of winter Texans, a lot of out-of-town ideas from all over the United States. And I think that a city manager from out of town can very quickly learn and adapt to what's needed here in this city. And they'll have a lot of good department heads to work with that can help get them up to speed. So, again, congratulations for being here, and thank you so much for the information. I hope it's the first step of, you know, finding the right city
Appreciate
manager.
your comments, thank you.
God bless you all.
Any closing statement by anyone? And if not, thank you for, you know, for the community, those that, especially here, the candidates that are here, you know, learning, you know, with us. And we obviously expect great things from you all and, of course, this council as well. So, yes, sir.
Just a closing thought. On behalf of SGR, I certainly appreciate the opportunity to work with you. I hope that what we've done resonated with you yesterday and today. I hope we've given you some options about what could make the components of a successful search work for you, but also identified the unique challenges you face in this role. We'd be pleased and honored to continue a relationship with you. Most of the time we do that. We'd like to, whether that's additional governance work or anything of that nature, and certainly we'd be honored and pleased to be selected to run your search. But my hope was that you at least got the insights of what you're facing on a very, very critical issue, and we're certainly just pleased to be part of that process, and hopefully that was, you've enjoyed it as well. So thank you so much. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for your good work, thank you. Yeah, so this workshop is now concluded. Thank you for joining us.